Welcome back to Ancient Secrets. Sit back, relax, and don't forget to comment where you're watching from down below. It's amazing seeing people all around the world supporting my small channel. Now enjoy the show. A desert dawn, circa 1300 BCE. The horizon glows a pale gold as the first light spills over an endless sea of sand. Along the Nile's green ribbon, morning mist clings to the reeds. All is still. Then a piercing cry breaks the silence, the scream of a hawk high above. It is the only sound in the cool hush of dawn. A lone falcon circles in the vault of the sky, its silhouette cutting across the face of the rising sun. Below, on the temple rooftop, a priest pauses in his morning rites. On the palace balcony, a pharaoh adorned in linen and gold tilts his head upward. In the fields, a farmer on his way to the riverbank stops in his tracks. Thousands of eyes lift to follow the falcon's flight. In that graceful, effortless glide, in the sharp cry echoing over the awakening land, the people of ancient Egypt sense a divine presence. They have heard the voice of a god greeting the morning. The high, keening call of the hawk seems to speak to them, a message from the heavens, a sign of protection, a promise of renewal. For over 3,000 years, the ancient Egyptians lived in intimate communion with their environment, and birds held a special, sacred place in their imagination. They were not merely animals fluttering in the sky. They were living symbols, messengers between worlds. The forms of gods come to earth. The Egyptians watched the birds of the Nile Valley with a reverence and wonder that shaped their religion, art, and daily life. They saw in those feathered beings a reflection of the deepest mysteries of existence. Why did the ancient Egyptians worship birds? What secret did they see written on the sky by beating wings? What power did they believe lived in the falcon's dive, the wisdom in the ibis's stroll, the protection in the vulture's embrace? Our journey will take us into that mystery, across deserts and temples, through myths and tombs, from the marshes teeming with life to the stars glittering in the night sky, in search of answers. Picture the land of Egypt in antiquity. The Nile flows broad and eternal, carrying life through the desert. Along its banks, papyrus thickets rustle with water birds greeting the dawn. Geese honk and preen in the shallows. Herons stand as still as statues before spearing fish. Ibises flap their white wings and settle in the reeds. Overhead, flocks of migratory birds darken the sky in season, vast V formations of geese and duck, clouds of swallows and pigeons arriving with the change of weather. Egypt sits on a crossroads of avian migration, and each year millions of birds pass through or winter along the Nile Engelsberg-Ideas. Engelsbergideas.com. To the ancient Egyptians, these yearly arrivals must have seemed like miracles, the sky itself coming alive with beating wings, heralding the inundation of the Nile or the advent of spring. They could not ignore such wonders. Among the many creatures that shared their world, from crocodiles in the river to lions in the hills, none were as ubiquitous or closely observed as the birds overhead. Engelsbergideas. Engelsbergideas.com. Birds were everywhere, drifting over the desert, nesting in the marsh, scuttling underfoot in the villages. The Egyptians became avid watchers of birds, perhaps the first bird watchers in history, the first naturalists. Engelsbergideas.com. In tomb paintings and inscriptions going back 5 millennia, we find detailed depictions of falcons and hoopoes, bee-eaters and doves, drawn with affectionate accuracy. These people knew the nuances of avian behaviour. They knew how herons carefully swallow fish head first so the scales go down smoothly. Engelsbergideas.com. They had seen kites, small hawks, wheeling over carcasses in the desert, talons extended in competitive display, englesbergideas.com. They watched geese waddle in line, walking with pursed toes, so as not to slip in the mood englesbergideas.com. Such observations went beyond utility. They hint at a genuine admiration. A scene carved in a 4,000-year-old tomb shows a man hunting birds in the marshes, hurling a throw stick into a dense flock rising from the papyrus. A snapshot of daily life englesbergideas.com. Yet these images also carry an undertone of respect. Each bird is drawn with careful attention to its plumage and form, as if the artist and those who would view it for eternity found beauty and meaning in even the common fowl. To the ancient Egyptians, the natural world was full of gods. Nowhere was this more evident than in their relationship with animals. Unlike later Greek or Roman thinkers, the Egyptians did not draw a hard line between humanity and the rest of creation. Africam.facts and details, comafricam.factsanddetails.com. They perceived every living creature as possessing a divine spark, a soul or bar of its own, just as a human does. Africam.factsanddetails.com. In fact, the very language of Egypt had no word equivalent to our animal, no term to separate creatures from people as wholly different categories. Africam.factsanddetails. Comais, all beings, were part of a single sacred community of life. In Egyptian thought, humans, gods, and animals were bound together in an interactive whole, sharing the earth as partners. englesbergideas.com Africami. factsanddetails.com. If a falcon soars upward on a thermal, that motion might be the same as a soul ascending to heaven. If a mother vulture fiercely guards her chicks, that act carries the same holiness as a mother protecting her child. It is no wonder, then, that the Egyptians saw the divine in birds. With their graceful motions and otherworldly ability to conquer the sky, birds struck these early people as creatures that moved between realms, bridges between earth and heaven. A bird could live among mortal men, perch on a humble rooftop, yet in the next moment it could ascend into the limitless expanse above, vanishing into the blue where the gods were thought to dwell. The sky itself was sacred, the domain of the sun god Ra, the vast body of the goddess Nut arching overhead, the pathway to the afterlife. Birds navigated that airy ocean effortlessly. Where humans looked up and saw an impassable barrier, birds found freedom. In the Egyptians' spiritual philosophy, this made birds natural messengers, go-betweens carrying prayers to the heavens and bringing down the blessings of the gods. The idea of the bird as messenger found its way into daily belief. Ancient texts and later Greek accounts tell us that Egyptians paid close attention to the movements of animals to read the will of the gods. Africam.factsanddetails. comafricam.factsanddetails.com. Priests maintained detailed calendars of lucky and unlucky days, and often these judgments hinged on whether certain animals were observed. For example, if on a given morning the priests sighted a particular bird, say a certain hawk flying west, it could be taken as an omen that that day was favoured or ill-starred. Africame.factsanddetails. Comment: they believed gods and spirits could inhabit living creatures, especially at critical moments. Africam.factsanddetails.com. Any bird gliding by might, under the right circumstances, be a god in disguise or a herald of divine intention. Imagine a superstitious Egyptian farmer. He is about to sow his field and glances at the sky. If a falcon flies overhead from the direction of the rising sun, perhaps he smiles, taking it as a sign that Ra blesses the endeavour. But if instead a crow caws ominously from the west, the realm of the dead, he might postpone the work, uneasy at the bad omen. In countless subtle ways, birds were woven into the spiritual fabric of Egyptian life as signs and signals from powers unseen. Yet, worship in ancient Egypt was not directed to animals themselves in a simplistic way. The Egyptians were not naive animal worshippers, as outsiders sometimes assumed. The creatures they revered were symbols and living representatives of God Safrakami.factsanddetails.com. A hawk was sacred not because it was a hawk, but because it was associated with Horus or Ra, the great sky gods. An ibis was honoured not for its own sake, but as the favoured form of Thoth, the god of wisdom. In Egyptian theology, a specific species could be the special manifestation of a deity's power, a kind of vessel that carried the divine essence. By venerating that creature, one paid homage to the god who took that form. Factsanddetails.com. As one scholar succinctly explained, the Egyptians did not practice zulatry, animal worship. Rather, they worshipped gods and goddesses who had an intimate relationship with the animal world. Africame.factsanddetails.com. The animals were the gods' sacred emblems, their companions or incarnations on earth. Nowhere is this relationship more vivid, more central to Egyptian religion than with birds. To trace the sacred role of birds in Egypt, we must venture into their mythology and pantheon, where the gods themselves often appeared with wings and beaks, taking on avian forms to express their power. These myths and symbols reveal much about why birds held such sway over the Egyptian spirit. High above the green valley of the Nile, a falcon soars. His eyes, keen and all-seeing, survey the land below, the rippling fields of barley, the glint of temple pylons in the sun, the distant dunes merging with the sky's haze. To the ancient Egyptians, this falcon was not just any bird, it was the god Horus. Horus, the falcon-headed lord, embodies the vault of the sky itself. They said his right eye was the sun and his left eye the moon. When the falcon flew across the heavens, the very celestial orbs moved with hymen. Wikipedia.org. In one myth, each dawn is Horus taking flight anew, his bright eye blazing to illuminate the world. Horus's wings span the horizons. His cry is the thunderclap of victory. The story of Horus is one of the great legends of Egypt. He was the son of Osiris, the beloved king who was murdered by his jealous brother Seth. Osiris's wife, the goddess Isis, saved their infant son Horus by hiding him in the marshes of the Nile Delta, protecting him from his vengeful uncle. Horus grew up in secret, nurtured by Isis's magic and the watchful care of the marsh spirits. No doubt the mythic imagination saw falcons circling above the reedy islands where the divine child lay hidden. When he came of age, Horus, the falcon, rose to challenge Seth and reclaim the throne of Egypt that was his birthright. In the epic contests that ensued, known as the contendings of Horus and Seth, Horus's prowess as a great falcon warrior was on full display. He took to the skies to do battle, fierce and swift. One can imagine the flashes of golden light as Horus's wings caught the sun, diving and wheeling as Seth, in the form of a hulking red-haired beast, or perhaps a ferocious hippo, tried in vain to strike him. The struggle of Horus and Seth raged across the land and sky, a mythic metaphor for the eternal conflict between order and chaos, light and darkness. At one point, Seth gouged out Horus's left eye, and so the myth explains why the moon is dimmer than the sun, its light impaired by that injury in Wikipedia.org. But Horus ultimately triumphed, with wisdom and healing from Thoth, as we'll see later, regaining his eye and the throne. He became the rightful king of the gods, just as, on earth, the pharaoh became the rightful king of Egypt. Thus, Horus was, above all, a god of kingship. The pharaoh was often called the living Horus, regarded as an embodiment of Horus on earthen.wikipedia.org. From the earliest dynasties, Egyptian kings aligned themselves with the falcon god. On ancient palace facades, the image of a falcon perched above the royal name signified the divine sanction of Horus. When a new king was crowned, he assumed a Horus name as one of his titles, linking himself to the falcon of the sky. We can imagine during coronation ceremonies the symbols of Horus everywhere, maybe a priest releasing a trained falcon to fly above the crowds, or the king himself wearing a magnificent falcon-shaped amulet on his chest. Horus's silhouette decorated banners and standards. His likeness in gold leaf stood guard over thrones. To the Egyptians, the falcon's traits were everything a ruler should be. The falcon is swift, strong, and precise, a master of the hunt. From high above, it spots the tiniest prey in the field. With unerring dive, it strikes its target. What better metaphor for a just king who sees all his land and smites injustice with decisive force? The piercing eyes of the falcon became the eyes of Horus, symbols of omniscience and protection. In fact, the eye of Horus, the Wedjat eye, became one of the most beloved amulets in Egypt, a charm to ward off evil. It's the stylized image of a falcon's eye with the unique markings of the peregrine, an eye that was injured and restored, representing healing and wholeness. Egyptians wore the eye of Horus as jewelry and painted it on tomb walls to ensure the safe and healthy rebirth of the dead. All of this springs from Horus's avian identity. The falcon, in life so adept and resilient, was a natural vessel for concepts of royal power, vision, and protection. Let's picture an Egyptian temple relief. A mighty pharaoh stands victorious over his foes, and hovering just above, carved in exquisite detail, is a falcon with outspread wings. In the falcon's claws, we see it grasping a Shen ring, the loop symbol for eternity, and sometimes the Ankh, the sign of life, extending these to the king. This is Horus in his falcon form, crowning the pharaoh with divine authority and the promise of everlasting life. Often the falcon wears on its head the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt, visually cementing the bond between the bird god and the earthly ruler. In other scenes, Horus in falcon form is shown protecting the young king, for instance on the famous Nama palette, circa 3100 BCE, a ceremonial carving from Egypt's unification period. A great falcon is depicted grasping in its talons a symbolic enemy figure by the nose, subduing the land of the papyrus marshes. Already, over 5,000 years ago, we see Horus the falcon as conqueror and protector, acting on behalf of the king. From the heat of midday battle, let us shift to the cool sanctity of the inner temple, where another bird god awaits, a figure with the head of an ibis and the body of a man, holding a scribe's reed pen and scroll. This is Thoth, the god of wisdom, magic, and the moon. In stately contrast to Horus's martial falcon, Thoth's sacred bird is the calm, deliberate ibis, often seen along the river's edge. The ibis, specifically the African sacred ibis with its white plumage and curved beak, has a gentle aspect. It walks slowly in shallow water, probing the mud for morsels with its long bill, as if perpetually deep in thought. The Egyptians associated this elegant creature with the intellect and with the moon that measures out time in the night sky. Thoth was thus typically depicted with an ibis head, and indeed many Egyptians believed that Thoth often took the form of an ibis when roaming the earth. Thoth's domains were many. He was patron of scribes and writing, the lord of knowledge and measurement, the inventor of language, the keeper of divine records. In the cosmic drama, Thoth played the role of mediator and counselor. It was Thoth who, according to myth, gave the magical words that resurrected Osiris, who healed Horus's wounded eye by uttering spells, and who stood by at the judgment of the dead to record the verdict on the scales of truth. With such a portfolio, Thoth was revered as one of the wisest and most important of gods. But why an ibis head for this deity? The exact reasoning is lost in time, but we can venture some poetic connections. The ibis's curved beak might have reminded the Egyptians of a crescent moon, a link to Thoth's lunar aspect. He was often called the silver disk of heaven, the moon that guides the night. Some also note that the ibis's black and white feathers could symbolize the duality of the lunar cycle, waxing and waning, light and dark. Additionally, the patient, methodical way an ibis wades through marshes might have evoked a thoughtful, studious character, akin to a scribe pondering his scrolls. One ancient Greek observer, Horapollo, wrote that the ibis was thought to control pests and even cure diseases by its presence, and thus it was seen as a protector of order, much like Thoth brought order through wisdom and writing. In temples devoted to Thoth, the Egyptians kept flocks of sacred ibises. Historical sources tell us that at Hermopolis, a centre of Thoth's worship, tens of thousands of ibises were kept and fed by priests Africam.facts and details, comafricam.factsanddetails.com. These birds wandered the temple courtyards freely, a living embodiment of the god among his people. When they died, they were mummified with great ceremony. We will return to this. One can imagine a pilgrim approaching the temple of Thoth at Saqqara. He sees the white birds stalking in the pools and gardens of the precinct, hears their soft, croaking calls. Perhaps a priest points to one and says, "Behold Thoth's living image." In that moment, the boundary between mortal and divine blurs. The god is present here and now, in the form of an ibis dipping its beak into the sacred pond. From the nimble falcon and the thoughtful ibis, we turn to a far more formidable bird, the vulture. To many of us today, the vulture might seem an unlikely sacred creature, a scavenger associated with death. But to the ancient Egyptians, the vulture was a potent symbol of motherhood, protection, and royal sovereignty. The goddess Nekhbet was depicted as a vulture, often shown hovering with wings spread wide. Nekhbet was the patron deity of Upper Egypt, the southern Nile, and one of the earliest goddesses known. She was called Mut, which simply means mother, and was regarded as the cosmic mother of the pharaoh and of the land itself. Why the vulture as a symbol of motherhood? The Egyptians observed nature closely, and they noticed that in vulture society it was typically the female vulture who dominates the nest and nurtures the young. They even believed, strangely but earnestly, that all vultures were female. Ancient lore, later recorded by Greek writers and hinted at in Egyptian symbolism, claimed that the vulture reproduces without any male, a kind of miraculous conception by the windprofraguram.com land off pyramids, org. In other words, the vulture was thought to be a self-generating mother, pure and chaste, yet fertile, a perfect image for the divine mother goddess. Because of this, the vulture was considered a symbol of purity and motherhood, and it was associated with several mother goddesses, including Isis, Mut of Thebes, and Nekhbet herself, landoffpyramids.org. Indeed, queen mothers and high-born ladies in Egypt often wore vulture headdresses, golden crowns in the shape of a vulture with wings spread around the brow. On the famous golden mask of Tutankhamun, a vulture figure inlaid with precious stones sits protectively on the young king's forehead, alongside a cobra, together representing Nekhbet of Upper Egypt and Wadjet, the cobra goddess of Lower Egypt. The message is clear. The two ladies, vulture and cobra, guard the king, uniting the land. Nekhbet as vulture gives him the wings of protection and the sanction of a divine mother. Visualize a relief in a pharaonic tomb, the image of a great vulture painted on the ceiling, wings outstretched from wall to wall, her feathers patterned in ochre and blue. She hovers above the figure of the deceased pharaoh as if sheltering him eternally. In her claws she clutches the symbols of infinity and power, perhaps the Shen ring and ankh, or sometimes the flail and scepter. Nekhbet's presence in royal art was omnipresent. Often she appears twice, mirrored, one vulture on either side of a sun disk, adorning the lintels of temple gates. As one enters the sacred space, it is as though passing under the wings of a colossal guardian bird. In some depictions, Nekhbet even is shown as a human woman wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, with a vulture headdress suckling the young pharaoh at her breast. Britannica.com. This striking image, a queen or goddess nursing the king, underscored that the pharaoh was a child of the divine, nourished by the goddess's own milk. By extension, every king was the fosterling of Nekhbet, as though a baby vulture cared for by the mother bird. Despite the vulture's dietary habits, Egyptians intriguingly did not focus on its death aspect, rather they saw its positive role. Vultures clean the land of carrion, preventing decay and disease, a kind of natural sanitation. So vultures could be viewed as agents of purification, consuming the old to make way for the new. In their wide circling flight, Egyptians perhaps also saw a constant vigilance, much as a mother watches tirelessly over her brood. When danger nears, a vulture defends its nest with surprising ferocity, swooping and striking at any intruder. Nekhbet too could be fierce. She was often called the White Vulture and invoked for the protection of both king and country. During battles, the pharaoh's war banners might bear the emblem of Nekhbet to ensure victory under her wings. The vulture was therefore a paradox made sacred, a creature of death that embodied the essence of life-giving motherhood and unyielding guardianship. Another significant avian deity was Mut, whose very name, as mentioned, means mother. Mut was worshipped especially in Thebes as the great divine mother and queen of the gods. She is often depicted as a woman wearing a vulture headdress and sometimes the double crown. Mut absorbs many of the qualities of Nekhbet. In a sense, Mut, Nekhbet and Isis all overlap as maternal protectors symbolized by the vulture. The consistent theme is that the vulture equals mother in the Egyptian symbolic language. We might find it odd, but consider what animal cares for its young more devotedly. The Egyptians saw no indignity in the vulture's scavenging. They focused instead on its caregiving and its mysterious regenerative powers, born without fathers, as they believed. The queens of Egypt themselves took on vulture symbolism. Titles like Mut Neferu, beautiful Mut, or she who wears the vulture crown, associated the royal women with this sacred bird, implying they too were incarnations of the Divine Mother watching over Egypt. Soaring falcons of kingship, patient ibises of wisdom, vigilant vultures of motherhood. These are but a few examples of how profoundly birds pervaded Egyptian myth and identity. We should also mention others. Ra, the supreme sun god, was often depicted as a great falcon as well, or a man with a falcon's head crowned by the sun disk. In this form, he was known as Ra Horakti, Ra, Horus of the horizons, essentially merging with Horus. Each morning, Ra-as falcon is born anew, flying up from the eastern horizon. To help him on his journey, the sky goddess Nut might take the form of a giant celestial swallow at dusk, swallowing the sun, then turn into a falcon or other bird at dawn to give birth to it again, a poetic explanation for the daily sunset and sunrise cycle. There was also Montu, a powerful war god venerated in Upper Egypt at Thebes, who took the form of a falcon or hawk wearing the sun disk and 2 tall plumes. Montu represented the ferocity of the sun's heat in battle, and pharaohs would invoke Montu's hawk spirit when charging into combat. Every time an Egyptian army saw hawks circling above the battlefield, they surely felt the gods were fighting with them. Even the goddess Isis herself, greatest of Egyptian goddesses, was closely tied to bird imagery. In funerary art, Isis and her sister Nephthys are frequently shown as human-headed kites, a type of hawk fluttering at either end of a corpse or coffin, fanning it with their wings. When Osiris was killed and laid out as a corpse, the mourning Isis transformed into a kite and flew around his body, wailing in despair. One myth tells that in this form she hovered over Osiris and used the beating of her wings to revive his breath for a moment. In that brief moment of restored life, she conceived their son, Horus. There is an Egyptian poem that alludes to this, describing Isis as a kite who made a wind with her wings to resurrect Osiris just long enough to create new life. This is an astonishing image, a goddess as a bird literally fanning a soul back from death. Here again, a bird becomes the bridge between life and death, between despair and hope. The Egyptians depicted this scene on temple walls, Osiris's mummy on a bier, with Isis as a bird above him, her wings spread protectively and intimately across his body. Wikipedia.org. What more vivid way to express the idea of resurrection? The bird's power to give life, to breathe a spirit into the lifeless, became a core motif. And because Horus was conceived through this act, every pharaoh as Horus incarnate owed his existence to the agency of a sacred bird. Thus, birds were entwined not only with the gods, but with the very lineage of kings and the promise of rebirth after death. We see that in myth, birds were far more than animals. They were persons, divine persons with character and will. They fought battles, healed and resurrected, nurtured and protected, decreed law and symbolized cosmic principles. This was the narrative and symbolic backdrop to Egyptian culture. It set the stage for the way real birds would be treated in rituals and daily devotion. But before we move on to that, we must explore one more crucial dimension of Egyptian belief, where birds take center stage: the soul of a human being itself. In the Egyptian language, the word for a particular aspect of the soul was br. The br is often translated as soul or spirit, though the concept was more nuanced. The br was essentially someone's spiritual essence, their personality and power, that could live on after death. And how did the Egyptians imagine the ba? Invariably, they envisioned it as a bird, specifically a small bird, often depicted as a human-headed falcon or a human-headed sparrowhawk, that could flit between the land of the living and the land of the dead. When you stroll through the halls of Egyptian museums or gaze at papyrus paintings, you'll often see a strange figure near the mummy, a bird with a tiny human face, sometimes wearing a miniature golden wig. This is the Ba. For example, in the papyrus of Ani, a famous Book of the Dead from around 1250 BCE, illustrations show Ani's Bai bird hovering above his coffin, waiting to reunite each night with his mummy, mclungmuseum.ut.edu, mclungmuseum.utki.edu. Why a bird? Because the Egyptians believed that after death, the Bai literally flew from the tomb into the world beyond. The Ba could leave the dark burial chamber during the day, roam freely, visiting old familiar places, basking in the sunlight, perhaps even travelling with the sun god Ra across the sky, and then return to the tomb and the mummified body at night. This daily journey of the Ba is described in their texts. "O my Ba, rise up and fly. May you see the world again. May you alight upon your corpse each night and be refreshed." One inscription pleads, "May my Ba see my corpse. May it rest on my mummy, which will never be destroyed or perish." mclungmuseum.utk.edu. The Egyptian afterlife was not a static, distant paradise where souls stayed put. It was an active, cyclical affair. The BA soul had to keep in contact with the body, which is why preserving the body through mummification was so vital. But it also had the glorious liberty to move and leave the tomb. And how else could it move between the realms except by flying? Thus, flight equals freedom of the soul. The bird was the obvious metaphor, made literal. However, the Egyptians did not think the BA was a totally separate ghost or apparition. It was the deceased person themselves in another form, their animated manifestation, as some have described mclungmuseum.utk. They imagined that at the moment of death, one's BA sprouts wings. Death, in their view, was not a final end, but a transformation, much like a caterpillar becoming a butterfly. The BA bird with a human face signified that the person still existed, only now they had the ability to take flight and traverse realms. One text explains that the BA was actually present in a person even before birth, but only at death did it fully reveal itself. Like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon. mclungmuseum.udk.edu mclungmuseum.udk.edu. It's a hauntingly beautiful concept. Imagine, as the Egyptians did, being able to take wing after you die, to feel the air under your feathers, to fly up out of your tomb into the sunlight, free of all pain and earthly worry, yet still yourself. Many tomb paintings show the Ba bird doing just that, fluttering above the mummy as if saying, "Don't worry, I'll return," then flying out toward the daylight. Sometimes the Ba is shown flying toward a sycamore tree where a goddess, often Nut or Hathor, offers it water and food, nourishment for the soul under the open sky. The Ba was thought to have senses and desires. It could be thirsty, hungry, or lonely. Family members of the deceased would leave offerings of food and drink in the tomb in part to sate the Ba when it came back at night. And at sunrise prayers they would call to the Ba to come forth into the day. A line from a funerary text joyfully proclaims, "He shall go forth by day, and his Ba shall not be restrained." mclungmuseum.utk.edu. A promise that the soul bird will have the freedom to travel at will. The Egyptians even crafted small BA bird statuettes and amulets to place in tombs. These were often wooden or faience figures of a bird with a human head and tiny human arms attached to its wings. Perhaps these served as a kind of anchor or substitute for the Ba, or a magic aid to help the deceased remember their own flight plan in the afterlife. One exquisite example in a museum shows the Ba bird painted in bright colours, wearing a golden wig with its wings folded as it perches on a base. This likely sat atop a coffin or shrine, symbolising the constant presence of the soul above its body. mclungmuseum.utk.edu mclungmuseum.utk.edu. The bird soul concept also influenced how Egyptians thought of their gods' interactions with the world. They believed each god had a Ba as well, a divine soul that could inhabit or manifest in various forms, often animals. One interesting theology held that, for instance, the Apis bull of Memphis, the famous sacred bull, was the Ba of the god Ptah or Osiris. In other words, the living bull was a kind of vessel for the god's soul. mclungmuseum.utk.edu. Similarly, a sacred falcon kept at a temple might be seen as the Ba of Horus, temporarily in that bird's body. This provided a theoretical underpinning for why worshipping an animal could be meaningful. You weren't worshipping a dumb beast, you were honouring the divine Ba that currently resided in that creature, mclungmuseum.utk.edu. In the case of humans having your Ba depicted as a bird with your own face hammered home, the hope that death was not the end. The Ba gave you mobility and agency beyond the grave, and flight specifically was joyously associated with the journey to the afterlife and the ability to join the gods in the sky. In numerous passages of the pyramid texts, the oldest sacred texts carved in the pyramids of kings around 2400 to 2300 BCE, the deceased king is said to fly up to heaven. One utterance declares, "The king is a falcon. His wings are those of a bird." mart.sophiatopia.org. Another proclamation has the king exclaim, "I have soared to the sky as a falcon. I have kissed the sky as a falcon." The notion of transformation into a bird to reach heaven recurs again and again. It was a way to express the otherwise inexpressible exhilaration of breaking mortal bonds. While the body lay still in its sarcophagus, the spirit in the form of a falcon or a BNW bird, perhaps a heron associated with the soul of Ra, flew out to the imperishable stars. Indeed, one of the most fascinating bird symbols is the Bennu bird, effectively the Egyptian precursor to the Greek phoenix. The Bennu was often depicted as a heron with long legs and two tall feathers on its head. It was closely linked to Ra and Osiris, representing both the sun and the concept of rebirth. According to Egyptian creation myths, at the dawn of time when the world was flooded in darkness and chaos, the Bennu bird was the first to appear, perching on a rock amid the waters of chaos and letting out a piercing cry that marked the beginning of creation. centerofexcellence.com, centerofexcellence.com. Some legends say the Bennu was born from the heart of Osiris or from the fiery explosion of the sun's first light. centerofexcellence.com. It was known as the soul of Ra. In fact, in the Book of the Dead, the deceased person at one point proudly announces, "I am the Bennu, the soul of Ra, and the guide of the gods in the Duat, the underworld." By identifying with the Bennu, the dead hoped to harness its powers of renewal. The Bennu, like the later phoenix, was said to periodically renew itself, rising again and again. Each morning sunrise was likened to the Bennu's rebirth from its own ashes, though the full burning phoenix story is mostly a later Greek elaboration. The Bennu's cry was also associated with time, a poetic idea that the bird's call started the clock of the universe. Herodotus, the Greek historian who travelled in Egypt in the 5th century BCE, wrote about a sacred bird called the phoenix. He admitted he had never seen one, only pictures, because it appeared so rarely. Once in 500 years, the priests of Heliopolis told him africamy.factsanddetails.com. The story Herodotus relates is intriguing. The phoenix Bennu would come from Arabia carrying the embalmed remains of its father in an egg of myrrh and deposit them in the temple of the sun at Heliopolis Africame.factsanddetails, comafricame.factsanddetails.com. This mythic image, a bird performing a funerary rite for its predecessor, resonated with the Egyptian cyclic view of life and death. To them, the Bennu was both a solar and a funerary symbol. It embodied the sun's daily rebirth and the hope that the dead too would be reborn. It's fitting that in chapter 83 of the Book of the Dead, titled For Becoming the Bennu, the deceased speaks as that bird, confident that he will rise again like the sun. Another small bird that carried heavy symbolism was the swallow. In Egyptian poetry and text, swallows were often positive symbols associated with love, with the stars, and with the blessed dead. There was even a spell in the Book of the Dead, Spell 86, specifically for transforming into a swallow. The swallow, a migratory bird, would appear in Egypt during certain seasons and at twilight, and the Egyptians noticed their affinity for the dusk and dawn. A common inscription on tomb walls from the New Kingdom has the deceased saying something like, "I will alight as a swallow, I will be among the flowers of the dawn." Swallows were often connected to the idea of joining the circumpolar stars, the imperishable stars that never set. Perhaps the quick, darting movement of swallows at dusk, flitting in and out as stars began to appear, inspired this link. Tiny carnelian amulets of swallows have been found in some burials Facebook.com, likely intended to magically assist the soul in taking the form of a swallow and thereby reach the heavens. The swallow was a benign, hopeful image, in contrast to some cultures where it's ill-omened. In one touching verse, a dead person says, "I have become a swallow. I have become that swallow which is on the incense tree," implying a wish to dwell in the fragrant, peaceful realm of the sacred grove, chirping happily like a little bird. We see that in the Egyptian vision of the afterlife, birds were indispensable guides and forms. A person might become a falcon to soar to the sun, a heron to recreate the first dawn, a swallow to twinkle as a star, or a kite to lament and be reborn. The sky was a vast temple, and wings were the key to its doors. Now, belief and symbol are powerful, but the Egyptians didn't leave it at the level of myth and metaphor. They acted on these beliefs in the most concrete ways. To truly honour their bird-related gods and to seek the boons those gods could bestow, the Egyptians engaged in elaborate rituals and cult practices centred on living birds. Here we cross into the astonishing world of sacred animal cults, one of the most distinctive aspects of late Egyptian religion. By the first millennium BCE, and even earlier in some cases, Egypt had developed cult centres for specific sacred animals all across the land. Each major god or goddess had beloved animal representatives. There were sacred bulls, sacred crocodiles, sacred rams, and very prominently, sacred birds. Different temples became famous for the creatures they tended. For example, at Edfu, Upper Egypt, the great Ptolemaic temple of Horus housed a live sacred falcon. At Hierakonpolis, the ancient city Nekhen, whose very name means City of the Hawk, tradition holds that a falcon shrine existed from Egypt's earliest days, possibly a precursor to the idea of a divine falcon in captivity. At Athribis in the Delta, archaeologists found falcon cult remains, indicating that certain falcons were kept and worshipped. But the most extensive evidence comes from places associated with Thoth and Horus, where ibis and hawk cults reached an almost industrial scale by late period times. Travel in your mind to Saqqara, the vast necropolis outside Memphis. Beneath the desert surface lies a warren of catacombs, underground galleries dug out of limestone, stretching for hundreds of meters. In these dark corridors, lit by flickering torches, the ancient priests placed millions of mummified birds as offerings to the gods. One set of catacombs is dedicated to the ibis and the baboon, both sacred to Thoth. Another is dedicated to the falcon, sacred to Horus or the solar Horus. When modern archaeologists first explored these tunnels in the 19th and 20th centuries, they were astounded. The sheer quantity defied belief. One gallery at Saqqara contained the remains of over 4 million ibises by some estimates africam.factsandDetails, comafricam.factsandDetails.com. Another area held over 1 million mummified hawks and falcons, layer upon layer of bundles and jars, each containing a carefully wrapped bird, stacked floor to ceiling. It is a silent, overwhelming testament to the fervent devotion of the Egyptian people towards their sacred birds. But how did this come to be? Starting around the late period, circa 600 BCE, and well into the Greco-Roman era, a practice grew where pilgrims would offer mummified animals to the gods as a pious act. Much like one might light a candle or donate a votive statue in a shrine, Egyptians began to donate animal mummies. At certain festivals or personal moments of supplication, a person might purchase a mummified bird from the temple precinct and dedicate it to the god, praying for healing or giving thanks or asking for wisdom. This was a way of tangibly sending a message to the deity. The animal mummy was like a wrapped letter containing your prayer, delivered to the divine through the sacred creature that was so closely identified with that god. The demand for these votive mummies was enormous. As many as 10,000 bird mummies might be produced in a single year at a popular shrine, Engelsbergideus, Engelsbergideus.com. Think about that, year after year for centuries. A whole economy sprang up around it. Priests and temple staff managed aviaries and breeding grounds to supply the necessary birds. Engelsbergideas.com. The texts speak of farms, or at least collections of ibises, numbering in the tens of thousands. Africam. Facts and details. Kama, in one account, the temple of Thoth at Saqqara reportedly had 60,000 live ibises on hand being fattened for sacrifice. Africam. Facts and details. Whether that exact number is exaggerated or not, modern excavations confirm huge numbers. And recently, genetic studies on mummified ibises suggest many were caught from the wild, since having to breed that many might have been impractical, implying that priests organised large-scale expeditions to capture wild ibises during their migration or nesting seasons. LiveScience.com, ResearchGate.net. Picture that for a moment. Teams of fowlers capturing birds not to eat, but to embalm for the gods. The entire landscape of Egypt, its marshes and cliffs, became in a sense a hunting ground for sacrificial animals. Yet, at the same time, those animals were revered. It's an intriguing duality. The Egyptians loved these creatures, but they also killed them in enormous numbers as offerings, believing this act released the creature's soul to intercede with the deity. Let's walk through the process in our imagination. A devout Egyptian travels to the holy site of Hermopolis, city of Thoth, during a festival. She has a sick child and seeks Thoth's intervention for healing. Outside the temple, vendors under linen awnings sell votive offerings, among them small mummies of ibises wrapped in linen bandages, some encased in pottery jars with hieroglyphic dedications. She purchases one. It's light, elongated, smelling of resins. Perhaps she whispers her plea into the wrappings, a personal prayer only the gods can hear. Then she presents it to the priests. In a ritual, they might consecrate it, saying prayers to Thoth, and then carry it reverently into the depths of the catacomb to place it with countless others. In that moment, she believes, part of her soul travels with that ibis mummy. When Thoth receives the souls of all those birds, he will also hear her petition. If her prayer is answered and her child recovers, she may return next year with another offering in gratitude. If not, perhaps she offers again, seeking mercy. Over decades and centuries, these small acts of faith multiplied to millions of sacred bundles in the catacombs, each one a story of hope, fear, gratitude, or devotion. There is something deeply poignant about these animal mummies. Modern researchers occasionally find within the wrappings a small piece of papyrus bearing a written prayer or the name of the giver. Africam. Factsanddetails.com. More often, the prayer was likely spoken aloud at the time of dedication, effectively entrusting the mummy to carry a spoken message to the deity. Africam. details.com. One could say the corridors of bird mummies are like a gigantic, tangible archive of human wishes, all placed on the wings of birds to deliver. In the case of ibis mummies, they usually contain a single ibis, sometimes whole, sometimes only partial remains, if the supply was tight. Some are placed in beautiful ceramic jars with stoppers shaped like an ibis head. Others are in rectangular coffins or bundles shaped roughly like the bird. Hawk or falcon mummies might be wrapped in linen with painted falcon features, or encased in falcon-headed wooden coffins. At certain sites, these were extremely popular. For instance, the falcon cult at Tel El Balamun in the Delta and at Edfu pumped out many falcon mummies. At Saqqara's falcon galleries, archaeologists even found fake mummies, bundles that were carefully wrapped to look like a bird but contained only a few bones or feathers africami. Factsanddetails.com. Why? Likely because at times the demand outstripped the supply of actual birds, and unscrupulous embalmers still wanted to sell a product. Or possibly some offerings were symbolic. The idea counted more than the actual remains inside. The fact that such fakes exist is both amusing and telling. Even in their devotions, the Egyptians had a degree of pragmatism and perhaps the occasional cheat. But it didn't diminish the fervour of the worship. A pilgrim might never know that their purchased falcon mummy lacked a full falcon inside, but they believed Horus recognised their intention nonetheless. Not all birds were simply mummified and stored. Some had a more exalted role in life. For example, the sacred falcon of Edfu was likely a living bird kept at the temple as an oracle or embodiment of Horus. In Ptolemaic times, priests would select a young falcon with specific markings to be the bar of Horus. This falcon was given a sort of coronation, ceremonially installed in the temple, possibly even enthroned on a perch, and worshipped daily. People might come to ask it questions, interpreting its movements or the way it ate as divine answers. When that falcon died, it would be mummified with great honours and a new one chosen. This practice mirrored the more famous Apis bull cult in Memphis, where a bull was the living avatar of Ptah, but applied to a bird. We have records of a similar tradition for geese at the temple of Amun at Karnak. Amun, one of whose symbols was a goose, he was poetically called the Great Cackler, had sacred geese kept in the temple lake. An inscription from Tutankhamun's reign mentions feeding the geese of Amun with grain offerings, so we can imagine priests tending to a gaggle of rather privileged geese that waddled among the temple reeds. These geese were not destined for sacrifice. They were honoured and pampered, seen as incarnations of the gods' peace and fertility. In fact, geese were connected to the creation myth, the cosmic egg laid by the primeval goose, so keeping geese was symbolically like maintaining the spark of creation itself. One extraordinary archaeological discovery in the 2000s was a shrine at the Red Sea port of Berenike, dating to around the 4th century AD, a very late period, when Egypt was under Roman rule. In that shrine, archaeologists found the remains of 15 headless falcons, carefully arranged, as well as a stele inscribed in Greek forbidding the boiling of a head in the shrine, and a harpoon placed nearby africame.factsanddetails, comafricame.factsanddetails.com. This perplexing find suggests some ritual involving sacrificing falcons, perhaps decapitating and cooking them in a specific manner. One interpretation offered by researchers is that boiling the heads might have been a step to remove the feathers, to prepare the bird for mummification, and the decapitation was part of a ritual offering to an obscure, falcon-headed deity worshipped by a local desert people, the Blemmies, africam.factsanddetails.com. The harpoon could have been a votive weapon. It's a reminder that bird worship persisted even into the Christian era in outlying areas. People were still venerating falcon gods and sacrificing to them, even as officially the empire had turned to new religions. The power of the avian symbol was hard to extinguish. Those falcons at Berenike may have been the last echoes of Horus worship before it finally faded. Let us delve now into the actual rituals and ceremonies where birds played starring roles. Some of these we've touched on. The offering of bird mummies, the enthronement of sacred birds. But there were other recurring ritual uses of birds. One common practice during large state festivals was the release of birds to carry messages or prayers. At the Jubilee, said festival of a pharaoh, accounts describe releasing 4 birds to the 4 cardinal directions, symbolically announcing the king's renewed rule to the whole world. One might imagine, during a coronation, white pigeons being released from a golden cage, so they soar to the north, south, east and west, a literal spreading of good news under the god's sky. This act was both practical, pigeons can home, carrying tidings, and symbolic, the king's influence reaching the 4 winds, and maybe the birds carrying the royal car or presents along with them. We have an inscription from a Middle Kingdom story, Tale of the Doomed Prince, where a falcon prophet proclaims something and a bird is sent out, though that is mythic. But, in general, Egyptians knew the utility of carrier pigeons. By Roman times, pigeons were used to send messages along the Nile. We can surmise that even earlier, the concept of birds as natural messengers was celebrated ritually. In temple rituals, chants often invoked bird imagery. Priests impersonating gods would sometimes wear masks or crowns representing those gods. In the temple of Edfu, during the annual festival of Horus, the priests carried a statue of Horus which likely had a falcon head, and they might do a ceremonial hawk dance. In the temples of Thebes, during funerary rites for Osiris, 2 women acting as Isis and Nephthys would imitate the fluttering of kites, perhaps by moving their arms in a wing-like motion as they sang laments, reenacting the mythic scene of the sisters as birds mourning Osiris. To observers, this was not mere theatre, it was a reactivation of cosmic events. The birds were part of the sacred drama, their cries and movements considered the actual voice and actions of deities in the present moment. Even in magic and medicine, bird components had power. A spell to cure illness might involve wearing a charm of a particular bird, or, in some cases, using a feather or bone in a potion. Ostrich eggs and feathers, for instance, were used in certain remedies. Ostriches, though not deified per se, provided the feather of Ma'at, truth, for the judgment scales. Goose fat or goose eggs appear in medicinal recipes engelsbergideas.com, showing that the boundary between practical and spiritual was thin. Consuming or using parts of these birds could be seen as ingesting a bit of the divine essence they carried. We should also highlight the role of birds in funerary art and texts beyond the BI. Coffins and tomb walls teemed with bird imagery. There were protective amulets in the shape of falcons, vultures, and winged goddesses placed on mummies. For instance, a common amulet was the vulture amulet, usually carved of gold or faience, laid on the throat or chest of the deceased to invoke Nekhbet's protection. Another was the bay bird amulet, tiny and usually of gold, depicting a human-headed bird. This was meant to ensure that the BA could reunite with the body. Funerary papyri, like the Book of the Dead, are illuminated with scenes of birds. We see fish-eating herons labelled as Benu birds, or falcons perched on standards. Chapter 13 of the Book of the Dead has the deceased proclaim, "I am a falcon, the son of Ma'at. I was conceived in Nekhen. I was born in Pe." This ties their rebirth to the mythology of Horus, Neccan being Hierocon Polis, centre of Horus, Pe, an old shrine of Horus. In another spell, the soul states, "I will transform into a falcon, lord of the sky, and no walls will stop me." The coffin of Princess Nesitanebetashru of 21st Dynasty has a gorgeous painting of a falcon spreading its wings across the lid, likely representing the air god Shu, or the protective embrace of Horus over her body. The winged scarab, while not a bird, it's a beetle, often appears with spread wings on the chest of coffins, pushing the sun disk, another flight metaphor for rebirth. But even actual birds appear. Some sarcophagi interiors have swallows and hawks painted in the sky above the mummy's head, symbolizing the soul's destination among the stars. The ceiling of Seti I's tomb famously has an array of vultures and astronomical figures, linking the concept of the heavens as a grand aviary of souls and gods. We can also discuss how the Egyptians incorporated birds into architecture. The winged sun disk motif was ubiquitous over temple doors, usually depicted as a red sun flanked by outstretched falcon wings, often with cobras attached. This motif originated, legend says, at Edfu Temple, representing the moment when Horus, in the form of a great winged disk, flew up to strike down the enemies of Ra. Thereafter, every temple had a winged sun at its gateway as a protective emblem. It was both beautiful and meaningful. Everyone who entered passed under the protective wings of Horus Shu Ra, symbolically cleansed of hostile forces. The interplay of birds and architecture goes further. Columns might have capital designs inspired by papyrus marshes where birds dwell. Temple friezes might show rows of alternating falcons and vultures, symbolizing Upper and Lower Egypt's patron deities joined in harmony. Consider also everyday items turned into art: chairs with duck heads as armrests, cosmetic jars topped with tiny bird finials, mirrors shaped like vultures with wings as the mirror's handle. All these artifacts show how deeply bird imagery saturated Egyptian life, from the monumental to the mundane. A New Kingdom jewellery piece found in Tutankhamun's treasure, for example, is a stunning pectoral of a vulture inlaid with turquoise, lapis and cornelian, wings spread to encircle the wearer's shoulders. This was literally worn by the king, enfolding him in Nekhbet's presence. On Tutankhamun's throne, the back depicts the boy king and his queen, and above them a hovering vulture and cobra, Nekhbet and Wadjet, spread their wings as if creating a canopy of heaven above the royal couple's heads. Such imagery was not only decorative, it was an ever-present assurance of divine sanction and protection. From the soaring heights of myth to the intimate details of craft, birds left their imprint on every facet of Egyptian culture. But beyond cataloguing symbols and practices, one may still ask, what does all this tell us about how the Egyptians saw the world? Firstly, it reveals a people who sought connection and continuity in all things. They refused to see themselves as separate from nature. Instead, they read nature as a sacred text, full of signs from the divine. In the dance of a bird's flight, they perceived patterns of the cosmos. The concept that birds represented both order and chaos in their unpredictability and seasonal regularity shows an acute awareness of balance. Engelsbergedeus.com. The Egyptians valued Ma'at, cosmic order and justice, above all, but they knew that Isfet, chaos, was part of the world too. Bird migrations were orderly in timing, yet chaotic in movement. A flock of geese arrives each year, order, but their exact flight path day to day might vary, chaos. To them, this echoed the dual nature of existence. The world has a structure given by the gods, but within it, free will and chance play out. Perhaps watching birds contributed to this philosophical outlook. As one writer put it, Egyptians saw in birds a reflection of the tension between the predictable cycles and the wild freedom of life. Engelsbergideas.com. Their worship of birds also underlines their optimistic spirituality, a belief that the divine was intimately present and benevolent. They saw gods reaching out to them not only from lofty heavens, but in the very flocks overhead or the tame bird perched in a shrine. This closeness to divinity gave them comfort. In times of uncertainty, a peasant might look at a falcon on the wing and think, "Horus is watching over me." In sorrow, one might hear the gentle coo of a dove and think of Isis's tender voice. In hope, one might await the return of swallows each year, believing them to carry the souls of departed loved ones back to visit. Moreover, to worship a bird was to embrace the idea of transformation and transcendence. Birds can do what humans cannot, take off and fly. By venerating them, the Egyptians symbolically transcended human limitation. They aligned themselves with creatures that could defy gravity, metaphorically asserting that humans too, through the gods, could defy the finality of death and ascend. In essence, birds became models for the spiritual journey. Many cultures have drawn parallels between birds and souls, but the Egyptians developed it into a rich, concrete system of belief and ritual that endured for millennia. Let's not forget the emotional aspect. The Egyptians, like people everywhere, felt awe. When the sky fills with thousands of migratory storks, it's awe-inspiring even to us now. To them, lacking modern scientific explanations, it must have been utterly profound, like witnessing the gods painting patterns in the air. They responded with reverence and joy. Some tomb autobiographies mention the deceased's love of hunting birds in the marsh, but also the joy of listening to the songs of birds. They delighted in the world's beauty. Their religion did not shun the material world. It embraced it wholly as divine. When they adored a bird, they were in a sense adoring the Creator's genius manifested in creation. Each bird species had its own character: wise ibis, protective vulture, brave falcon, etc. And these were threads in the tapestry of the divine. We might ask, did the Egyptians literally think the gods were birds, or that birds were gods? The answer is a kind of yes and no that made perfect sense to them. A particular bird might contain the god's power, the be of the god, but the god could also transcend that one form. Horus wasn't only a falcon, he could also appear as a human, or a lion man, like the Sphinx form, or even invisibly. But the falcon was Horus's truest image, his favoured shape. So they treated falcons with the dignity due a god. The same with Thoth. He could be a baboon too, but the ibis was special to him. This fluidity allowed a god to be present in multiple places, a comfort in a large land with many temples. Horus could be worshipped simultaneously in Edfu's falcon, Hierakonpolis's statue, and Heliopolis's sun disk. In all cases it was Horus, just wearing different masks. That theological flexibility is quite sophisticated. It points to a world view where the sacred permeates the world rather than being confined to a distant heaven. The Egyptians also recognized the sacrifice implicit in their bird worship. When they took a falcon or an ibis and killed it as an offering, that was a solemn act. They gave back to the gods what was most precious, life itself, symbolically saying, "We trust you with this life. Please, in return, grant us favour." It was not wanton, it was ritualized and reverent. Some mummified birds have broken necks. They were likely euthanized by priests swiftly, possibly by dislocating the spine, a humane method. One might find that gruesome, but to them it was sanctifying the creature, sending it to join the god. They even had pet cemeteries and buried animals that weren't offerings, like beloved dogs and monkeys with their owners. It indicates a real affection and spiritual regard for animals, birds included. Herodotus noted that if an Egyptian house caught fire, the people's first concern was often rescuing their cats, or they'd mourn deeply if a cat or dog died naturally. Africame.facts and details, comafricame.factsanddetails.com. For hawks and ibises, he wrote, the penalty for killing one, even by accident, was death. Africame.factsanddetails, comafricame.factsanddetails.com. That's how sacred those birds were. The Egyptians enforced divine law through human law to protect them. It's morning again on the Nile. The sun's rays spread like fingers through the palm fronds. Down by the riverbank, lotuses begin to open. A fisherman poling his canoe disturbs a flock of ibis. They leap into flight with a sudden clatter of wings. In a nearby acacia tree, little green bee-eaters chatter and a hoopoe flashes its crown. The fisherman might smile at the scene, perhaps whisper a thank you to Thoth for the sight of his birds, a good omen for a good catch. Up at the village, a mother coaxes her child to eat porridge, telling him, "Finish your food, or the swallow will carry away your sleep," invoking a friendly household superstition. A swallow darts through the beams of their open roof, incidentally snapping up flies. Life goes on, surrounded by the presence of birds. Fast forward to dusk. Our fisherman, now done for the day, stands on the shore as the sky turns orange and purple. Over the western desert, the sun sinks, and in that painted sky the silhouettes of birds cross in front of the golden disk, perhaps a V formation of geese headed to roost. To his eyes, it's as if the gods themselves are writing on the sky, the hieroglyph of a flock telling him that Ra has gone to the underworld and will return by their guidance. He may recall a line from an old hymn. The sky is encircled by the flight of the swallows. The sun is renewed in their midst. He feels at peace. The birds have delivered the sun safely to the horizon. All is in order. Now imagine a much later time, say 2025, a traveller in modern Egypt, looking at those same horizons. Birds still fly over the Nile as they did millennia ago. The pharaohs are gone, the temples in ruins or buried in sand, but the sky remains. If you stand at dawn by the pyramids of Giza, you might hear the cry of a hawk or see pigeons fluttering around the peaks of the limestone giants. Unwittingly, you are experiencing a fragment of what ancient Egyptians felt every day. In their heyday, they built a civilization that soared on the wings of their imagination, inspired by the wings of birds. They worshipped birds because in them they perceived the mystery of the soul, the immediacy of the divine, and the profound connection between the earthly and the heavenly. Birds were a language, the gods' language, and the Egyptians learned to read it well. In the falcon's piercing gaze they saw royal authority, in the ibis's gentle strut, sage intelligence, in the vulture's vigilant glide, maternal care. They believed that by honouring these creatures they were aligning themselves with cosmic principles, the keen sight of justice, the nurturing embrace of love, the cyclical renewal of life. And what does their reverence reveal about their view of life, the soul, and the sky? It reveals a worldview in which everything is alive with spirit. To the Egyptians, life on earth was deeply enmeshed with the life of the cosmos. The soul was not chained in a tomb or body. It could take wing and shine as a star. Death was not an end, but an eternal morning. The soul, like a bird, would take flight into a new day. The sky was not a void, it was a realm of beings, a tapestry where each star, Each bird in flight had meaning and personality. They felt the presence of the divine all around them, as near as the flutter of a dove's wings or the shadow of a falcon passing overhead. In their reverence for birds, we see a people grasping for transcendence, seeking to overcome human limitation by identifying with creatures of the air. We see a deep empathy for nature, a humility that recognized wisdom and divinity in forms other than human. And we see hope that just as the sunbird rises again each day, just as a fledgling bird leaves the nest and takes to the wind, so too would their souls find freedom and new life beyond the sunset of death. Their art, their rituals, their very language, with common expressions like to go up like a bird, meaning to die, or to alight like a bird, meaning to arrive, all speak to this graceful philosophy. Life was a journey from the earth to the sky, and each bird was a tiny mirror reflecting the face of a god, a fragment of truth flying by. In the quiet of an ancient desert morning, that hawk's cry still echoes across time. Can you hear it? It calls out with a question and an answer intertwined, a question of wonder. "Oh humans, why do you look up at me with such awe?" And an answer of faith, because in your flight we see our own souls, we see the possibility of eternity. The Egyptians heard that message in every rustle of feathers. They built monuments and composed hymns to express it, and ultimately they lived and died believing that the soul of a person could join the birds in the sky, free forever. So, the next time you notice a bird gliding on the wind, consider for a moment the eyes of those ancient priests, kings and farmers watching that same sight thousands of years ago. Feel the poetry and mystery they saw, a creature between earth and heaven, belonging partly to our world and partly to another. In that liminal space they found the divine. They worshipped birds not out of simple superstition, but out of a profound recognition that the boundary between mortal and immortal, between flesh and spirit, between ground and sky, is thin as a feather, and sometimes with the right eyes, one can see straight through it to the eternity beyond. The camera pans up one last time to the Egyptian sky, deep blue and limitless. A falcon soars across the sun. Its cry fades into the wind. The sun rises higher. The day of ancient Egypt, that long, long day of the pharaohs, has ended now, but the sacred birds still fly, and through them, the spirit of Egypt lives on forever under the same eternal sky, night in the desert. A pale moon casts its glow over an ocean of sand rippling to the horizon. In that vast silence, 3 dark silhouettes break the flatness of the earth, colossal triangles etched against the starry sky. These are the pyramids of Giza, brooding and magnificent, their edges still sharp after thousands of years. The desert night is cool, and a gentle wind whispers across the plateau, carrying grains of sand and echoes of an ancient past. In the distance, the lights of modern Cairo flicker, but here at the foot of the pyramids, time stands still. Step closer, feel the ground, hard, packed with millennia of history. Place your hand on a limestone block larger than a car and realize it's just one of millions that form these giants. The stone is cold and inert, yet it hums with a silent story. Overhead, the Milky Way spills across the heavens, and it's easy to imagine that the stars themselves are listening. There's a sense of something eternal here, as if the pyramids were born from the earth at the dawn of time. But they weren't. They were built, stone by stone, by human hands. And that realization that humans once conceived and constructed these mountains of stone is both humbling and electrifying. How did this happen? Where did the pyramids of Egypt come from? It's a question that hangs in the air, as heavy as the stones themselves. Standing here, you can't help but wonder, who were the people that dared to shape eternity with their bare hands? What kind of civilization could project its will onto the landscape in a form so immense, so precise, so mysterious? In the cool hush before dawn, as the first light begins to silver the east, the pyramids loom like hulking guardians of a secret. We seek their origin as if searching for a hidden answer at the heart of the world. The poet Rumi once wrote, "I keep secret in myself an Egypt that doesn't exist." In a way, we all carry an imagined Egypt within us, a land of mystery and golden light, of pharaohs and forgotten knowledge. The pyramids stand as ambassadors of that imagined Egypt. For centuries they've beguiled explorers, scientists, conquerors, and dreamers. We project onto them our fantasies of lost wisdom, extraterrestrial architects, or spiritual revelations. Yet the true story of the pyramids is no less fascinating than the myths. It's a story written in sand and stone, in sweat and genius, in faith and ambition. It spans thousands of years and countless lives. It is the story we are about to explore, a journey across time, through the rise of a culture and the march of innovation, through the realm of mythology and the cutting edge of modern science, all centered on these ageless monuments. As the sun's first rays break over the eastern horizon, the cap of Khufu's Great Pyramid catches fire with light. For an instant it gleams as it once did when it was sheathed in polished white limestone and topped with a golden capstone. Imagine that moment. Sunrise in ancient Egypt, the pyramidion blazing like a star fallen to earth, flooding the plateau with morning glow. To those who built it, this was more than a tomb. It was a resurrection machine, a stairway to the heavens, a statement to the universe that a great king had joined the company of gods. To us, it is a portal into deep history and an enduring riddle. Our journey begins at the foot of this radiant monument, but to truly answer the question, where did the pyramids come from, we must travel further back to a time before these stones were stacked, before Egypt was even a unified kingdom. We must trace the pyramids' lineage through archaeology, engineering, history, mythology, and philosophy. We will walk alongside ancient architects and labourers, peer into the minds of pharaohs and priests, weigh the evidence of modern science and the echoes of ancient texts. We will also wander the fringes of speculation, those captivating alternative theories, to see what they offer and what they lack. And finally, we'll reflect on why these monuments still captivate us, what they say about human ambition, memory, and our eternal quest to touch the heavens. The vast silence of the desert is about to be broken by a story nearly as old as civilization itself. To find the origin of the pyramids, we journey back over 5,000 years, long before the first pyramid rose from the desert. We find ourselves on the banks of the Nile around 3200 BC. The air is hot and still, buzzing with dragonflies. Along the river, clusters of reed huts form villages where people tend small fields of barley and emmer wheat. This is pre-dynastic Egypt, a patchwork of tribes and communities slowly coalescing into something greater. The Nile is their lifeblood. Every year its floods renew the soil, turning desert into green abundance. In this crucible of sun, water, and rich black earth, one of the world's first great civilizations is taking shape. Imagine a traveller walking along the Nile in those days. He would pass fishermen casting nets in the shallows, farmers coaxing melons and figs from the ground, potters and weavers plying their crafts. He might see sacred rituals to local gods, perhaps an offering at a simple shrine to ensure the flood's return, or a procession honouring the falcon or jackal, deities that would later populate Egypt's pantheon. Life follows the rhythms of the river and the seasons. And yet, something new is stirring. Over generations, villages band together into districts, and districts into proto-kingdoms. Competition and warfare flare between them, and out of this contest emerges leadership, chieftains with ambition and divine claims. These early rulers begin to think beyond the next harvest, beyond their village, toward a legacy that will endure. One of the earliest forms of legacy is the tomb. Even in the pre-dynastic era, Egyptians take great care with their dead. In shallow grave pits dug into the desert sand, bodies are interred in fetal position with pots of food, beads, stone pallets for grinding cosmetics, provisions and comforts for life beyond death. These humble burials are the seeds of an idea that one's resting place can be a kind of vessel for immortality. Over time, as society grows more stratified and wealth accumulates, tombs become more elaborate. By around 3000 BC, local chieftains in Upper Egypt, the southern Nile Valley, are building larger sepulchres, mud brick chambers beneath low mounds, sometimes marked by standing stones or simple mastabas, bench-like mud structures. They reflect a belief that will ultimately drive pyramid building, the conviction that death is not an end but a transition, and that the dead require monumental care to facilitate their new life. Around 3100 BC, a momentous event unfolds. Egypt becomes one nation. Tradition tells of a king named Narmer, often identified with the semi-legendary Mens, who unified the two lands of Upper and Lower Egypt, forging one of the world's first nation-states. Whether it was Narmer alone or a series of kings, by the dawn of the first dynasty, the pharaoh stands as the divine ruler of a domain stretching hundreds of miles along the Nile. With unity comes centralized power and the ability to marshal resources on a grand scale. The kings of the first and second dynasties, circa 3100 to 2700 BC, establish a capital at Memphis, near the apex of the Nile Delta. They also establish the pattern of royal burial that will evolve dramatically in the centuries ahead. In the desert sands of Abydos in the south, these early pharaohs are laid to rest in tomb complexes that are the largest of their time. Broad rectangular pits lined with brick or wood, topped by mounds, and surrounded by enclosures. Some even include the graves of servants sacrificed to serve the king in the afterlife, a sobering and telling testament to royal authority. Meanwhile, just south of Memphis at Saqqara, the pharaoh's high officials are interred in mastabas, massive rectangular tombs of mud brick with sloping sides and flat roofs, built above subterranean burial chambers. These mastabas stand perhaps 3 to 6 meters tall, like squat platforms. They are, in effect, precursors of the pyramid. The word mastaba in Arabic means bench, and these structures indeed resemble benches of eternity upon which the spirits could rest. Within their simple form lies the germ of a revolutionary idea, that one could stack one monument atop another, rising higher toward the sky. By 2700 BC, Egyptian architects have mastered mud brick construction and are experimenting with stone for decorative elements and small shrines. But no one has yet tried to build a monument entirely of stone or to reach truly soaring heights. That is about to change under a visionary pharaoh of the Third Dynasty. Travel now to Saqqara around 2650 BC. The sun blazes high and white in the sky as a crowd of workers assembles on a rocky rise overlooking the Nile Valley. King Djoser stands apart in a linen kilt and cap crown, and beside him his vizier and chief architect, a man whose name will echo through history, Imhotep. Before them rises something the world has never seen, A pyramid. Not a smooth, sharp pyramid as we know from Giza, but a stack of 6 giant limestone steps, each layer smaller than the one below, forming a tall staircase of stone. Originally, Djoser's tomb was likely planned as a traditional mastaba, a large square platform, but something inspired Imhotep to push the design further, to literally stack innovation upon innovation. They built the mastaba of finely cut local limestone instead of the usual mud brick, already a bold break with tradition. Then they made it bigger, expanding it on all 4 sides. Then, daringly, they added another mastaba-like layer on top of the first, and another above that. The structure grew in stages into a towering wedding cake of stone, climbing nearly 62 meters, 203 feet, into the sky. It became the Step Pyramid of Djoser, the world's first large-scale stone monument, and, essentially, the first pyramid. Imagine the awe of the workers and courtiers watching this form emerge, rising far above the flat desert. Nothing of this size had ever been attempted, at a time when most buildings were 1 or 2 stories tall. Here was a structure dwarfing the landscape, visible for miles. To the ancient Egyptians, height was an expression of sacredness. The tops of mountains or tall obelisks were closer to the gods. Djoser's pyramid, with its series of steps, was conceived as a stairway to the heavens, a literal means for the pharaoh to climb to join the sun and stars. Its shape echoed that of a primeval mound. In Egyptian creation myth, the world began as a mound of earth emerging from the infinite flood. Now Djoser's pyramid became that mound, symbolically reenacting creation and providing a perch from which the king's spirit would leap to the celestial realm. The Step Pyramid was not a standalone structure in an empty desert. Imhotep designed an entire funerary complex around it, a grand stage for the king's afterlife rites. Encircling the pyramid was a massive rectangular enclosure wall of white limestone, nearly 10 meters high and punctuated by mock doorways and real entrances, giving the illusion of a palace facade. Inside this 37-acre enclosure lay courtyards, temples, chapels, and colonnaded corridors. There were altars for sacrifice and dummy buildings sculpted in stone, perhaps to house the king's spirit and the gods who would accompany him. One courtyard contained stone pillars and platforms for the Hebsed festival, a jubilee ritual meant to renew the pharaoh's vitality. Imhotep provided for Djoser to continue celebrating jubilees even in death. The entire complex forms a miniature city of stone for the deceased king. At its heart, the Step Pyramid towered, originally clad in smooth white limestone that must have shone under the desert sun. We can picture the completion ceremony, Djoser, aging but proud, in his royal regalia, standing in the courtyard before the gleaming pyramid as the final casing stones are set in place atop the highest step. Priests in white robes chant prayers to Ra, the sun god, and to the sky goddess, Nut. Incense burns, wafting fragrant smoke that mingles with the dry desert air. Perhaps Djoser himself ascends partway up the steps in a ritual, symbolically climbing toward the heavens to claim his eternal place. The assembled nobles and workers cheer, marveling that they have built a mountain. In that moment, the pyramidal form proves its power. A new idea has taken root in the Egyptian imagination, that a king's tomb can be a man-made mountain, a meeting point of earth and sky. Djoser's Step Pyramid was an astonishing success. It not only secured Djoser's memory for eons to come, indeed even in later eras Egyptians remembered and honoured Djoser, and Imhotep was eventually deified as a patron of wisdom, but it also ignited a pyramid-building fervour among subsequent kings. The genie was out of the bottle. If one Step Pyramid could confer such glory and divine connection, Might not a larger, more refined pyramid do even more? The rest of the Third Dynasty saw a couple of attempts. For example, Pharaoh Sekhemkhet began a step pyramid at Saqqara, left unfinished, and another pharaoh started one at Zawiet el-Aryan that never rose beyond its base. These projects suggest that Djoser's successors were keen to replicate his monument. Little did they know the challenges and innovations that lay ahead. The road to the Great Pyramid, and indeed to answering where the pyramids came from, would run through a period of feverish experimentation in design and engineering. The age of pyramids had dawned, and there was no turning back. We step forward a few decades to the reign of Sneferu, around 2600 BC, at the dawn of the Fourth Dynasty. Sneferu is a name that later Egyptians would remember with a kind of affectionate awe. He was known as a benevolent king and, notably, as the master builder of pyramids. Under Sneferu, pyramid building truly comes into its own through bold trial and error. If Djoser's step pyramid was the proof of concept, Sneferu's reign is the great workshop in which the pyramid's final form is perfected. Picture Egypt in Sneferu's time, a prosperous, optimistic nation under a capable and charismatic pharaoh. The capital Memphis bustles with activity, scribes tallying grain, craftsmen fashioning fine jewellery and statuary, priests performing daily temple rituals to keep the gods content. Sneferu likely commanded more resources and manpower than any previous king, and he was determined to use them to create monuments that would outshine his predecessors. His architects inherited the knowledge of Imhotep's step pyramid, but Sneferu had an even more ambitious vision, a true pyramid with smooth, angled sides. The challenge was immense. No one had ever attempted to build a continuously sloping pyramid before. The step pyramid's terrace-like profile was easier to stabilize. To get from a step design to a flat-faced one might seem straightforward. Fill in the steps, smooth it over, but in practice it was a leap into unknown engineering territory. Sneferu, however, was undaunted. Remarkably, he embarked on not one but 3 major pyramid projects during his reign, effectively turning Egypt into an open-air research and development centre for pyramid construction. The first of Sneferu's pyramids rose at a place called Maidum, about 100 kilometres south of modern Cairo. It appears to have begun under his predecessor, possibly King Huni, as a 7-step pyramid. Sneferu's builders decided to transform it. They added an 8th step and then filled in the steps with angled limestone casing to create a smooth-faced pyramid. For a time, Maidum stood as the first true pyramid, but disaster struck. At some point, perhaps during construction or maybe years later, the outer casing and parts of the upper masonry collapsed, sloughing off and leaving only the inner core standing. Today, Maidum looks like a strange stone tower rising from a rubble mound, the collapsed pyramid. What went wrong? Likely the angle was too steep, about 51.5 degrees, and the underlying structure not keyed in strongly enough. When the outer layers were added, their weight may have caused the whole thing to destabilize. Maidum was a costly lesson that building a smooth pyramid required new solutions in structural engineering. Sneferu was not discouraged by the setback at Maidum. If anything, he was spurred to try again with improvements. He shifted his attention northward to Dahshur, a broad desert plain not far south of Saqqara, and there he launched an even grander pyramid. This is the famous bent pyramid. It started rising with a steep slope of 54 degrees, similar to what Maidum had attempted. The pyramid climbed to about 49 meters high when the builders began noticing alarming signs: cracks in the casing, instability in the structure's lower parts. The weight of millions of stones was creating dangerous stresses. In a brilliant feat of problem-solving, Sneferu's architects changed the design mid-course. Roughly halfway up, they abruptly reduced the angle from 54 degrees to about 43 degrees. As a result, the pyramid's profile bends. It starts steep, then becomes shallower toward the top, giving it a distinct bent appearance. This compromise ensured the pyramid could be completed without collapsing. When finished, the bent pyramid stood about 97 meters, 318 feet, tall. Uniquely, much of its original polished limestone casing remains intact today, especially on the lower slopes, allowing us to see a pyramid almost as it looked in Sneferu's time, its white sides still smooth after 4.5 millennia. Imagine being present at Dashur as Sneferu's bent pyramid neared completion. Perhaps there's initial dismay that it didn't turn out as a straight-edged pyramid. One can picture court observers whispering, "It looks a bit odd." But, more importantly, it stood solidly. The shift in angle solved the structural crisis. Workers who had feared another collapse could now breathe a sigh of relief. Sneferu, pragmatic and forward-looking, likely took pride in the ingenuity displayed. His builders had essentially invented on the fly a new form. The bent pyramid, in fact, is a fascinating transitional monument. It teaches by its very form. It whispers of lessons learned. Don't build too steep, adjust and adapt. And it was still a highly impressive edifice, gleaming in the sun, its dual slope shape perhaps even seen as purposeful by some. Some theories suggest it might represent 2 stages of the sun's journey, or 2 conjoined pyramids symbolizing Upper and Lower Egypt, though it's more likely simply an engineering necessity turned an aesthetic. Sneferu wasn't content with good enough, though. Even as the bent pyramid was being finished, he embarked on his 3rd pyramid at Dashur, a few kilometers to the north. This time, armed with knowledge from his previous attempts, he and his team played it safe. They designed the entire pyramid at the gentler 43-degree angle from the start. This is the Red Pyramid, named for the reddish hue of its limestone core blocks, now exposed. With its lower slope, it could be built much larger in base. The Red Pyramid's base spans about 220 meters per side, nearly as broad as the Great Pyramid's base, though because of the moderate angle its height reached only about 105 meters, 344 feet. It was completed smoothly, without drama, and stands today as the world's first successfully completed true smooth-sided pyramid. Once, it too was encased in gleaming white limestone, and though most of that casing was later plundered, the pyramid's shape is intact, a near-perfect triangle against the desert sky. Envision Sneferu in his later years, perhaps standing on a pavilion viewing the Red Pyramid when it was finished. By now he's an old king, but one who has seen his vision realized. Before him lies a perfect pyramid, its sides meeting at a point, symbolizing the sun's rays solidified. Sneferu had done it. In one reign he built more pyramid volume than perhaps all other pharaohs combined. The Maidum, though ruined, the bent, and the red. He pioneered techniques for large-scale stone construction, experimented, stumbled, and ultimately succeeded. Later, Egyptians revered him as a wise and beneficent ruler. Perhaps part of that reputation came from the notion that he cared enough to perfect the craft of eternal homes for the kings, sparing his successors the trial and error. Indeed, the knowledge gleaned in Sneferu's reign set the stage for the pinnacle of pyramid building to come. Standing at Dashur amid Sneferu's 2 giant pyramids, the bent pyramid with its peculiar shape and the red pyramid with its classic form, one can feel the momentum building in our story. The Egyptians now have the know-how to erect mountains of stone at will. They've solved problems of angle, weight distribution, and construction method. The baton is about to pass to Sneferu's son, who will inherit a kingdom at peak capability. The stage is set for the most famous pyramid of all, a project of such scale and ambition that it would not only break records of height and mass, but also create a legend that echoes through all subsequent history. The Great Pyramid of Giza is on the horizon, and so we arrive at the most iconic chapter in this story, the building of the Great Pyramid at Giza. The time is around 2550 BC. King Khufu, whom the Greeks later called Cheops, Sneferu's son, has taken the throne. He inherits the fruits of his father's experiments and a well-oiled state apparatus ready to undertake greatness. Khufu's own ambition is towering. Perhaps inspired by his father's multiple pyramids, he aims to build one pyramid that will surpass them all, an eternal monument to his reign and to Egypt's might. The site chosen is Giza, a plateau of bedrock on the west bank of the Nile, not far from Memphis. Giza is essentially a limestone outcrop, elevated and enduring, a symbolic spot for a monument meant to last forever. It offers a solid foundation to bear tremendous weight. To the east of Giza, the Nile's green valley unfurls, and beyond it, Memphis and the Delta. To the west stretches the Sahara. In the Egyptian mindset, east, where the sun rises, was the land of the living, and west, where the sun sets, was the land of the dead. By situating his pyramid on the west edge of the Nile Valley, Khufu placed his eternal house right at the gateway to the afterlife, where each evening the sun, and by extension the pharaoh's soul, would descend. Practical considerations were ideal too. Immediately to Giza's south and east lay good quality limestone quarries for bulk stone, and the Nile's proximity meant easy transport of materials like the high-grade white limestone from across the river and granite from the distant south. Before building upward, Khufu's engineers had to plan and prepare. They carefully surveyed the site. Remarkably, the base of the Great Pyramid is almost a perfect square, and it's aligned nearly exactly to the cardinal points, true north, south, east, west. The level of precision is astonishing. The sides of the square base differ in length by mere centimetres, and it's oriented to within 1/4 of a degree of true north. How did an ancient society achieve this without compasses or GPS? They likely used the stars and the sun. One theory suggests they observed a particular star, perhaps in the Big Dipper or Orion, at the moment it crossed the meridian, the imaginary north-south line in the sky, using a merket, a sighting tool with a plumb line, and aligning two such tools to bracket a star's path. They could pinpoint north. Another method might have been tracking the shadow of the sun at noon or using water-filled trenches to create a perfectly level reference, and then sighting the sun's rising setting at equinox to get an east-west line. Whatever the exact methods, the surveyors of Khufu displayed incredible skill. They levelled the rocky ground by cutting it down in high spots and building it up in low spots. Some evidence of perimeter post holes and trenches suggests they may have flooded a grid of channels with water to detect high points, essentially using water as a giant spirit level. When the foundation was ready, it was probably accurate to within a few millimetres over its entire 13-acre expanse. With the site prepared, construction began. Imagine the scene. Thousands of labourers converging on Giza. They set up a vast camp, a city of workers, on the plateau or perhaps near the cultivation line by the river. There are quarrymen slicing out limestone blocks with copper chisels and wooden mallets, leaving behind the short stepped scars that can still be seen in the Giza quarry pits. Other teams ferry these blocks on sledges to the building site. Sledges creak and groan under the loads. Gangs of men haul them with ropes, likely chanting in unison to coordinate the pull. Supervisors shout instructions, dust swirls, pulleys squeak, and ramps of packed earth and brick begin to form against the rising structure. Nearby, at the Nile's edge, a fleet of boats delivers precious materials. From the east bank comes fine Tura limestone, gleaming white, intended for the outer casing, loaded on barges during the inundation season and floated to Giza via a purpose-dug canal into a harbour that may have existed right by the pyramid complex. From hundreds of kilometres upriver in Aswan come shipments of granite, enormous blocks destined for the king's burial chamber and internal passages. Each granite block might weigh 50 to 80 tons, so heavy that special barges and clever towing strategies are needed. A recently discovered papyrus diary of an official named Mera gives us a glimpse of this process. Mera records how his crew in year 27 of Khufu's reign transported stones from Tura in the east to Giza, describing the loading of cargo and the handoff to the construction site overseer, who was none other than Khufu's half-brother, Ankaf. This fragile ancient logbook confirms what long had been assumed. An organised supply chain by river was the artery feeding the pyramid project. The workforce itself is not a horde of toiling slaves under the lash, as Hollywood often imagined, but rather skilled workers and temporary labourers conscripted from all over Egypt. Archaeology has found at Giza the remains of a workers' city, long galleries where presumably crews slept, bakeries that turned out tens of thousands of loaves of bread, breweries for gallons of beer, butchers' quarters with bones of cattle and goat. The workers ate meat regularly, a sign they were valued, as common folk mostly had grain diets. There were even cemeteries for those who died during the project, buried honourably near the sacred site, something no slave would receive. Hieroglyphic graffiti left on blocks deep inside the pyramid record the names of work gangs like the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkaure, often accompanied by jovial titles or slogans. These informal markings show a sense of camaraderie and pride among the builders. These people were likely farmers and villagers, fulfilling labour duty during the flood season, when their fields were underwater and idle, a sort of national service that also put food and beer on their tables, courtesy of the royal ration, and connected them to something greater, the divine mission of building the king's eternal home. How did they actually raise this colossal structure, step by step? The pyramid began as a broad platform, and layer by layer it climbed. Archaeologists and engineers surmise that ramps were the key. Perhaps a long straight ramp of rubble and mud was built abutting one side, up which sledges could be dragged by teams of men or oxen. As the pyramid grew taller, the ramp grew longer and higher. It could have been a single massive ramp, though that would become unwieldy and might itself have used as much material as the pyramid. Another possibility is a system of zigzagging ramps on one face, or a spiral ramp corkscrewing upward around the pyramid's flanks. There is evidence at other pyramid sites, like a curious unfinished spiral ramp around the base of an earlier pyramid at Maidum, and ramp remains at Karnak and in quarries, that point to various ramp strategies. Some modern theorists, like French architect Jean-Pierre Houdin, have even proposed an internal ramp, a tunnel-like path built inside the pyramid structure, climbing upward and opening at corners for turning the blocks. Interestingly, a notch in the Great Pyramid's northeast corner and some voids detected by microgravity scans could hint at something like that. On the lower courses, construction was easier. Multiple teams could work simultaneously on different parts of the perimeter, and blocks could be dragged relatively short distances up modest ramps. But as the pyramid rose, the logistics became more demanding. Perhaps the builders switched to a combination of smaller ramps and platforms. We can imagine a lively, almost industrial scene. On the pyramid's broad terraces, gangs lever blocks into position with wooden levers and stone counterweights. At any given time, hundreds of blocks might be in motion, some being pried into precise alignment, the fine-tuning done by trimming the stone in place and using a bit of gypsum mortar to bed it level. Others being hauled up ramps by straining groups chanting "Hep, Hep" in rhythm. Sledges might glide more easily if the path was lubricated. Egyptian art indeed shows a person pouring water in front of a sledge bearing a heavy statue to reduce friction. Dust and noise fill the air, mallets striking chisels, foremen calling out, workers singing heave-ho songs. Despite the human bustle, there is meticulous organisation behind it all. The pyramid's design is being executed to astonishing exactness. We know that as they built upward, they maintained the sides' perfect slope and orientation. They may have used taut ropes anchored at the corners to guide the angle of each face, or sighted along the edges from below to ensure straightness. The levelling was checked at each tier. Interior spaces like the ascending passage and chambers had to align properly. The most critical components were the interior chambers and passages. Khufu's architects changed the traditional layout by moving the main burial chamber above ground, within the pyramid body. They first cut a descending passage down into the bedrock under the pyramid, perhaps intending an underground burial chamber initially, which they abandoned. Then they built an ascending passage that leads up into the pyramid's core to the so-called Queen's Chamber at mid-level. Not actually for a queen, it may have been an abandoned burial chamber or held a statue of the king's car. Further up, they constructed the majestic Grand Gallery, an impressive corbel vaulted corridor 8 meters high that slopes upward, perhaps used as a ramp itself to haul the heavy granite blocks for the king's chamber on sledges, then later serving as a grand ascending hall for the soul or for maintenance access. At the top of the Grand Gallery, a narrow passage leads to the king's chamber, smack in the heart of the pyramid. This chamber was lined and roofed with huge granite slabs from Aswan. Incredibly, each ceiling slab weighs about 50 tons. To prevent the chamber from being crushed under the weight of masonry above, the builders stacked 5 hollowed-out stress-relieving compartments above it, capped by a gabled roof of granite beams. Standing inside the king's chamber today, one can see the flat, dark granite ceiling and sense the mass above. It is silent, warm, and awe-inspiring, a technical marvel that it still stands intact. Those invisible little chambers above did their job flawlessly. Herodotus, visiting 2,000 years after Khufu, was told some fantastic things about this pyramid. That it took 20 years and 100,000 workers in rotating crews to build, modern estimates suggest around 20 to 30 years, and a workforce averaging 20,000, with seasonal fluctuation, far fewer than 100,000 at any one time. He also recounted how it was built tier by tier, and that ingenious machines, perhaps levers, lifted stones from one level to the next. Notably, he wrote of an inscription, likely apocryphal, that supposedly recorded the amount of radishes, onions and garlic fed to the labourers, costing 1,600 silver talents, a staggering sum. This detail humanises the project. Amidst the grand construction, thousands of humans needed to be fed and cared for daily. Indeed, traces of garlic and other foodstuffs have been found at the workers' village, confirming that feeding the builders was a major operation. Imagine those mass meals: bread and beer by the vat, lentil stew, maybe roasted goat on good days, and the sharp scent of garlic, an ancient energy snack, fueling the workers as they hefted blocks. Day after day, year after year, the Great Pyramid climbed skyward. Perhaps around year 15 or 16 of Khufu's reign, the bulk of it was done, and the work shifted to the apex and the fine outer casing. Finally, the moment came to place the capstone, likely a squat little pyramidion of hard stone, granite or perhaps limestone coated in electrum, a gold-silver alloy, so it shone brilliantly. We might picture a small ceremony as that capstone was set. Maybe Khufu was alive to see it, maybe not. Some king lists suggest Khufu ruled about 23 or 24 years, others up to 50, it's not certain. But at some point, the Great Pyramid stood complete, 146.6 meters tall, 481 feet, gleaming white in the sun with a golden top that caught the first light of dawn and the last light of dusk. What a sight it must have been! For nearly 3,800 years, it would hold the title of the tallest human-made structure on Earth, until medieval cathedrals and then the Eiffel Tower surpassed it. Its 4 triangular sides faced the 4 cardinal directions almost perfectly. From a distance, the pyramid might have looked not like steps or blocks, but like 4 flat triangles of pure light meeting at a point, a shape so simple yet, on a scale so grand, it defied belief. Up close, one would see the joints of the casing stones, but barely. The Egyptians fitted those outer stones with hairline precision. Many casing blocks survive near the pyramid's base and at Khafra's pyramid, and the gaps between them are nearly knife-thin. The entire base covers about 13 acres, roughly 7 city blocks, and the sides were so straight that the error margin is only about 0.05%. The whole mass of the pyramid is around 6 million tons, comprising some 2.3 million blocks of stone. It's hard to grasp those figures. Some like to illustrate it this way: the Great Pyramid's volume could form a wall around France 3 meters high, or nowadays you could build about 30 Empire State Buildings with the same volume of material, and all of it moved by human muscle, planning and willpower. When the pyramid was finished, attention turned to the accompanying elements of Khufu's pyramid complex. To the east of the pyramid, they built a mortuary temple where priests would perform daily offerings to the departed king's spirit. A magnificent causeway, essentially a long raised and partly covered roadway, extended from this temple down to the edge of the Nile floodplain, about half a mile. At that lower end stood the Valley Temple, where the king's body would have first been received after being ferried across the Nile from Memphis. Parts of Khufu's causeway are long gone, but causeways of later Giza pyramids had beautiful reliefs, and Khufu's likely did too, perhaps depicting celestial scenes, or the transport of the king's body, or the gods welcoming him. Around the pyramid, subsidiary queens' pyramids popped up, 3 small pyramids to the east for his wives or family, and small mastaba tombs for nobles arranged in neat rows like satellites around a planet. Even boat pits were included, long narrow pits that housed dismantled wooden barges. Astonishingly, 2 such pits on the south side of the Great Pyramid were found to contain nearly intact full-size cedar ships. One of these, often called Khufu's ship, was excavated in the 1950s and reassembled, a 43-metre-long vessel that might have been a ceremonial solar bark for the king's journey with the sun god, or perhaps a vessel to use in the afterlife. It was buried, disassembled, like a model kit waiting to be built in the next world. The Great Pyramid of Khufu, together with the slightly smaller pyramid of Khafra, Khufu's son, and the much smaller pyramid of Menkaure, Khafra's son, form the triad at Giza that has become the postcard of ancient Egypt. Khafra's pyramid, built a generation after Khufu's, originally stood 143.5 meters tall, 471 feet, only about 3 meters shorter than Khufu's, and because it's on higher ground, it still looks almost as tall. Khafra, perhaps wisely, didn't try to outdo his father in size, but did something clever. He incorporated an awe-inspiring guardian into his complex, the Great Sphinx. Carved from a natural spur of bedrock at the foot of his pyramid, the Sphinx has the body of a recumbent lion and the head of a man wearing a pharaoh's Nemes headdress, most likely bearing Khafra's own facial features. At 20 meters tall and 73 meters long, the Sphinx became a symbol of royal power fused with solar imagery, the lion being a symbol of the horizon and the sun. It gazes due east, aligning with the rising sun at the equinoxes. To stand before the Sphinx is to feel the gaze of eternity. Even in Khafra's day, it must have been startling, a stone colossus emerging from the sand, as if the desert itself took form to guard the sacred necropolis. Khafra also built an elegant valley temple of large limestone and granite blocks, where several exquisite statues of himself, in hard diorite stone, showing him protected by Horus the falcon god, were found. His mortuary temple against his pyramid was richly decorated, and a causeway likely connecting the two, perhaps covered to create a mysterious transition from the bustling Nile shore to the sacred pyramid base. Menkar's pyramid, constructed around 2490 BC, was smaller, originally approximately 65 meters high. Perhaps resources were running thinner, or maybe Menkar had a shorter reign. He died before fully completing the casing. Interestingly, the lowest courses of Menkar's pyramid were cased in red granite from Aswan, the rest in white limestone. He might have intended a striking two-tone effect, or simply emphasized the base with costly granite. Menkar's complex includes 3 little satellite pyramids and his own beautifully sculpted statues. It was during his time that the famous triads of Menkar with goddesses were made. By the end of the 4th dynasty, around 2465 BC, the Giza Plateau was a veritable city of monuments. The Greeks much later would dub these the pyramids of Cheops, Chephren, and Mycerinus, and count the Great Pyramid among the 7 wonders of the world. Even in ancient Egyptian times, these structures must have inspired reverence. Texts from centuries later hint that rituals and endowments continued at Giza's temples. The Egyptians of later periods looked back on the Pyramid Age as a golden era when kings were mighty and close to the gods. Interestingly, an inscription in the 5th dynasty implies the workers who built Khufu's and Khafra's pyramids were not always fond of those kings. It says that due to the oppressive labour, the people eventually referred to the pyramids by the name of a humble shepherd, Philetis, rather than speak the king's names. This might indicate that while the state glorified the monuments, the common folk whispered their own narratives. Herodotus recounts something similar, that the Egyptians he spoke to around 450 BC remembered Khufu and Khafre as cruel tyrants who closed temples and enslaved labour, a story likely exaggerated or reflecting folk memory of hardship. Meanwhile, Menkar was remembered as a just and pious king who, according to legend, even halted work on his pyramid to ease his people's burdens. In any case, the pyramid-building fervour began to wane after Giza. The 5th dynasty kings, starting around 2465 BC, still built pyramids at sites like Abusir and Saqqara, but on a smaller scale. The focus shifted in some ways. These later pyramids were lower. Sahur's pyramid, for example, was about 48 meters tall. Unas's, at the end of the 5th dynasty, only about 43 meters. They weren't pushing for sheer mass. Rather, they invested in elaborate temple decorations and a remarkable innovation, inscribed funerary texts. In King Unas's pyramid, circa 2345 BC, for the first time the walls of the burial chamber and corridors were covered in hieroglyphic spells, the pyramid texts. these are incantations, hymns, and instructions to help the king navigate the afterlife, to resurrect and join the gods. Unas' pyramid is tiny compared to Khufu's, but inside, carved into the stone, are profound utterances like, "O king, you are this great star, the companion of Orion, who traverses the sky with Orion, who navigates the Duat with Osiris. May your soul stand among the imperishable stars, your power undiminished for eternity." These texts are the earliest religious writings known, and they reveal explicitly what the great silent pyramids of the 4th dynasty implied, that the pyramid was a launch pad for the soul, that the king aimed to ascend to the sky, perhaps becoming a star, and to accompany the sun god on his daily voyage. The 6th dynasty continued in this vein. Pharaohs like Teti, Pepi I, and Pepi II built modest pyramids. Pepi II's was about 52 meters tall, at South Saqqara, but they all featured pyramid texts on their interiors. Significantly, by this time, 2200s BC, the centralized power of the pharaoh was weakening. Pepi II, according to tradition, ruled over 90 years, a record, but by the end of his reign the country's governance had faltered. The first intermediate period ensued, a time of decentralization and relative chaos, circa 2180 to 2050 BC. During this period, large royal projects like pyramid building virtually ceased. The grandeur of the Old Kingdom Pyramid Age had passed, leaving its monuments standing as giant reminders in the desert, while petty warlords and famine troubled the land. But Egypt eventually reunified around 2050 BC under the Middle Kingdom, and with this Renaissance came a brief revival of pyramid construction. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs, like those of Dynasty 12, circa 1990 to 1800 BC, looked back to the Old Kingdom for inspiration and legitimacy. Kings such as Amenemhat-Shuk, Senusret-Thur, and their successors did build pyramids for themselves, but with some differences. These later pyramids, at sites like Lisht, Dashur, again, Hawara, and Ilahun, were often made with a core of mud brick or a loose fill of sand and debris, and only an outer casing of stone. They tended to be smaller, in the range of 30 to 70 meters high originally, and have not aged as well. Many are now little more than eroded mounds, because once their limestone casing was removed in antiquity, the mud brick core weathered away. However, one Middle Kingdom pyramid, Amenemhat III's pyramid at Hawara, became famous in antiquity for an associated structure, the so-called labyrinth, a sprawling complex of courts and chambers that Herodotus described with admiration, claiming it surpassed even the pyramids. This labyrinth was likely a grand mortuary temple and administrative centre. Its remains suggest a dense grid of rooms which must have seemed like a maze to visitors. Middle Kingdom pyramids continued to feature texts, by then coffin texts, an evolution of pyramid texts, and later the Book of the Dead were used by non-royals too. But interestingly, by the Middle Kingdom, building pyramids was not exclusively a royal privilege. Some high officials built small pyramids atop their tombs, essentially decorative elements. And an intriguing note, even outside Egypt, the idea of pyramids spread. Centuries later, in what is now Sudan, the kingdom of Kush, or Nubia, adopted Egyptian cultural elements and built many small pyramids, circa 700 BC, 300 AD. Those Nubian pyramids at sites like Meroe and Nuri are much narrower and shorter, 10 to 30 meters tall, but served as tombs for kings and queens of Nubia, showing how the pyramid idea had a long afterlife as a symbol of royalty and connection to Egypt's golden age. By the New Kingdom circa 1550 to 1070 BC, Egyptian pharaohs had changed their burial strategy entirely. They no longer built pyramids, opting instead for hidden rock-cut tombs in the Valley of the Kings in Thebes, modern Luxor. Pyramids were by then seen as beacons that attracted tomb robbers. Indeed, nearly all Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom pyramids had been plundered long before. However, the pyramid shape still held symbolic resonance. New Kingdom tomb chapels of private individuals sometimes had small pyramidion capstones, and the concept of a pyramid as a symbol of the sun's rays persisted in obelisks and benben stones in temples. The age of the pyramids in terms of building great ones was over by 1600 BC, but the cult of the pyramid endured. The Giza pyramids themselves stood as enduring monuments that later generations couldn't fully comprehend. As centuries rolled on, people forgot precisely how and why these giants were made, and myths grew. Ancient Egyptians of later periods sometimes attributed the pyramids to gods or semi-divine sages from a previous world. In the Greek and Roman era, foreign visitors were astonished by them. Greek historian Herodotus, in 450 BC, devotes pages to the pyramids, repeating what Egyptian priests told him, some truths and some tall tales. One tale he recorded, that Pharaoh Cheops, Khufu, was so oppressive he even prostituted his daughter to fund his pyramid, and that the daughter quietly asked each client for a block of stone, and built a smaller pyramid for herself, likely a bit of folklore born from a need to humanize or morally question such an enormous project. Another story was that the pyramids had been built by giants or under the guidance of the god Thoth. Yet another, told by medieval Arabic writers, was that a mythical pre-flood king named Surid built the Giza pyramids to preserve knowledge and treasures against the coming deluge, in effect turning the pyramids into massive stone vaults of ancient wisdom. None of these legends is factual, of course, but they underscore something. The pyramids, from antiquity to today, inspire wonder and speculation. When direct memory faded, imaginative explanation took over. Throughout their long history, the pyramids have been not only monuments, but also mirrors reflecting the psyche of those who regard them. To some they were symbols of kingly pride, to others proof of ancient wisdom, to others still an unsolved riddle of a lost age. And all the while, the pyramids themselves simply endured. They suffered the depredations of stone thieves, especially in the first millennia AD, when casing stones were stripped for lime and building material for nearby Cairo. They felt earthquakes. One in 1303 AD shook loose many casing stones of the Giza pyramids. They were clambered over by adventurers and archaeologists in the 19th century, some of whom blasted new entrances with gunpowder. Yet they remain. The core form of the Great Pyramid is essentially as it was in Khufu's time, minus its smooth outer mantle. The pyramids fulfilled one part of their builders' aspirations. They proved to be far more permanent than the empires that followed. So, from these origins, from small pits in the sand to the Great Pyramid's peak, where did the pyramids come from? They sprang from the imagination and social organization of the early Egyptians. In a span of a few hundred years, driven by a vision of connecting with the eternal, Egyptian kings and their people transformed the landscape of the Nile Valley. They quarried and moved staggering amounts of stone. They devised architectural solutions on the fly. They harnessed religion, art, and manpower into a single purpose. The pyramids came from a culture that dared to make the impossible real. They are, in a sense, stones that grew out of the dreams of a civilization. We have traced the historical timeline of the pyramids, from pre-dynastic beginnings to the height of the Old Kingdom and beyond. But understanding these monuments fully also means asking, how exactly were they built? By what ingenuity did those ancient builders achieve these feats? And why did they devote such colossal effort? What spiritual or symbolic meaning underpinned it? To answer these, we shift perspective from the broad sweep of history to the fine details of engineering and belief. Let's put ourselves in the sandals of an ancient Egyptian engineer now and marvel at the practical genius involved. The engineering of the pyramids is a subject of endless fascination. These structures are not simply heaps of stone, they are carefully planned edifices requiring astounding precision and labour. Modern builders and architects, with all their machinery, still gape at the logistics and accuracy achieved by the pyramid builders. So how did the Egyptians do it, with technology from over 4 millennia ago? First, consider the tools and materials at their disposal. The pyramid builders lived in the Bronze Age. Iron was not yet in use. Their primary metal was copper, and a bit later bronze, an alloy of copper and tin. Copper chisels, awls and drill bits were employed to cut softer stone like limestone. For hard stones like granite, which copper alone can't easily carve, they relied on human cleverness. They used pounding tools made of even harder stone, balls or dolerite pounders to pulverize the rock surface, and abrasives like sand. Sand is essentially quartz, and quartz can wear away granite. To drill holes in granite for inserting wooden wedges, they likely used copper tube drills with a slurry of sand and water as the abrasive. To saw granite, a copper saw blade, no teeth, with sand could slowly grind its way through. Archaeologists have found half-cut granite blocks with narrow saw kerfs and circular drill cores with spiral grooves left by this method. Evidence of these ancient techniques. It was slow but effective given patience and manpower. For moving heavy blocks, the Egyptians had no pulleys or motorized winches, but they had the inclined plane, the lever, and the roller, in the form of rolling logs or round balls beneath sledges. Ramps, as we've discussed, provided the gradual incline over which weight could be dragged upwards. Wooden sledges were a crucial piece of tech, basically sled platforms that heavy objects sat on, which teams could tug with ropes. An Egyptian tomb painting from a later period famously shows 172 men pulling a colossal statue on a sledge, while one person stands at the front pouring water on the ground, presumably to reduce friction and help the sledge glide. This is presumably how they moved many pyramid blocks as well. They also likely used ropes and levers extensively. Good rope can multiply force when wrapped around things or used in systems of pulleys. Even if the pulley wasn't a wheel but a smooth post, one can still rig a block and tackle in a rudimentary way. Using wooden levers under a block, a few men can lift or pry it up enough to slide rollers or smaller blocks under, thus jacking it incrementally. The builders could then build up temporary scaffolds of brick or stone beneath to support raised blocks. Surveying and planning were done with remarkable accuracy, using surprisingly simple instruments. The merket, which is basically a sighting rod with a plumb line to indicate vertical and align with stars, and the gnomon, a simple rod used to track shadows. They had a tool called the A-frame level, 2 wooden beams forming an A with a plumb line hanging from the apex. When the plumb line hit a marked center point on the crossbar, the base was level. Using such devices, they could level broad areas by testing multiple points. They measured lengths with ropes knotted at intervals. Rope stretchers were a class of workers who specialized in accurate measurement. To get right angles, they likely used the 3-4-5 triangle rule, which is essentially Pythagorean. Evidence suggests the concept of a 90-degree triangle with sides 3 to 4 to 5 was known practically, if not theoretically. All this provided the foundation for their bold designs, but doing the math on paper or papyrus is one thing. Physically executing it with tens of thousands of labourers is another. The Great Pyramid, for example, required installing roughly 800 blocks per week, on average, over about 20 years. That's a daunting pace, but not impossible with an organised workforce. Archaeologist Mark Lehner once broke it down. If 20,000 workers each moved an average of one 2.5-ton block in a month, they'd more than meet the quota. In an assembly line fashion, while one crew was placing a stone on the structure, another crew would be quarrying the next one, a third crew hauling one up the ramp, and so on in rotation. One crucial understanding is that the pyramids likely grew in tiers or steps initially, even the Great Pyramid. That is, the builders erected the core in a series of mastaba-like layers. This would create a stepped pyramid shape temporarily. Then they would fill in the steps with casing blocks from bottom to top. In the case of Khufu's pyramid, there's evidence that as they finished sections of casing, they built small secondary ramps or used the Grand Gallery as an internal ramp to move the largest granite blocks upwards. Herodotus's account that they finished the top first and base last probably reflects that they put casing stones starting at the top once the core was done, and worked downward, removing ramps as they went. Logical, so debris wouldn't mar finished surfaces below. Even with all this planning, the builders faced myriad challenges. They had to ensure the pyramid didn't tilt or settle unevenly, which is why a solid bedrock foundation was ideal. They had to maintain the intended angle consistently. If one side started to drift shallower or steeper, the pyramid would twist or meet incorrectly at the apex. We see that in some lesser pyramids, like one at Meidum or the pyramid of Amenemhat III at Dashur, that partially collapsed in the Middle Kingdom due to excessive weight on a subpar foundation. But at Giza, the execution was nearly flawless. When the four sides of Khufu's pyramid were built up, they met within a few centimetres at the summit. It's thought they might have left a small platform near the top during construction to align the final courses from all sides together. The level of precision achieved boggles the mind. The Great Pyramid's base is level within about 2 centimetres overall. The sides are oriented within minutes of arc to true north-south, east-west, likely to align with North Star or due north as determined by star transit method. Many have marvelled at the mathematical subtleties. The perimeter of the base divided by twice the height equals pi, 3.14, within a small margin. Did the Egyptians know pi intentionally, or was it a coincidence of using a particular slope? The 51.5 degree slope happens to produce that ratio. We're not sure. They didn't leave notes saying, "We chose this angle to encode pi," but they did likely have an approximation of pi in practice, as needed for circular calculations. Also, the Great Pyramid slope corresponds to a rise of 14 units for every 11 units horizontally in cubit measure, which might have been chosen because 1411 is about 1.273, and the ancient eye might have found that aesthetically pleasing or structurally sound. Some argue that might be tied to a 7 to 5.5 sect in palms, how Egyptians described slopes. The interior required careful engineering too. How to cut a long descending tunnel at a constant slope through rock. They had to measure angles and straight lines in dark tunnels, likely using plumb bobs and sighting lines with oil lamps. The junction of the ascending and descending passages in Khufu's pyramid is amazingly precise. The multi-ton granite plugs that sealed the ascending passage were cut to fit so snugly that they remained in place until Arab excavators dynamited around them in the 820s AD. In the relieving chambers above the king's chamber, the planners used not only beams, but left some gaps and spaces, an intuitive, if not analytical strategy to diffuse the weight. These chambers weren't meant to be seen by human eyes. they were purely functional spaces. Yet they are finished reasonably flat and even have graffiti from the workers. Famously, one graffito found in the highest chamber by its modern discoverer in 1837 includes a work crew name, Friends of Khufu, along with a mark that seems to spell Khufu, thereby solidly linking the Great Pyramid to Khufu historically, a vital piece of evidence against any notion of a lost civilization building it. Of course, unanswered questions remain about construction. How exactly did they manage the final closing of the pyramid? Did they leave a gap to haul remaining blocks inside, then plug it from above? Or did they haul from outside until the very last casing piece was dropped in by lever from the top? We can only hypothesize. There's also the ongoing debate, where did the giant granite blocks of the king's chamber get raised? Possibly straight up the Grand Gallery, which may have had a sturdy wooden scaffold turning it into a ramp inside the pyramid, with pulleys or counterweights. The Grand Gallery's layout with slots along the ramps hints that wooden beams might have been lodged across at intervals, perhaps to brace a massive haul system or act as stops for a trolley. As we consider all these possibilities, one thing becomes evident. There was no magic involved, only human ingenuity and labour. This point bears emphasis because through the ages, whenever people couldn't immediately fathom how the pyramids were built, they often resorted to explaining it via legend or supernatural help, from gods or later aliens, which we'll get to. But archaeology has revealed the very human fingerprints on these projects, literally in some cases, like finger smears in mortar. We find ramps, tools, workers' barracks, accounting papyri. There isn't anachronistic technology, rather there is a mastery of available technology. By the time the Great Pyramid was completed, Egyptians had proven themselves master engineers of their era. They had systematically tackled a series of problems. How to quarry millions of tons of stone. They developed large quarrying techniques and logistics. How to move them, ramps, sledges, river transport. How to lift them, levers, inclined planes. How to position them precisely, measuring, levelling, casing from top down. How to create internal spaces that wouldn't collapse, corbelling, relieving chambers. How to feed and organise a small army of labour, centralised administration, worker villages. It was perhaps the world's first mega-project requiring state-level coordination comparable to later endeavours like building cathedrals or even modern infrastructure projects. In the end, what stands out is that the ancient Egyptians approached building the pyramids not just as back-breaking work, but as a labour of faith and national effort. They didn't have computers or engines, but they had a deep understanding of materials. They exploited the properties of wet sand, of rolling logs, of tensile strength of ropes, of weight distribution, and they had an almost modern level of project management, broken into tasks and phases. And behind it all was a powerful motivation to fulfill a religious duty and ensure their king's eternal life, which in their worldview meant maintaining the cosmic order for everyone's benefit. This fusion of practicality and spirituality is key to appreciating the pyramids' construction. They were as much spiritual endeavours as engineering ones. Now that the engineering picture is clearer, we have to ask, why go to these lengths at all? The pyramids were technically tombs, but they were unlike any tombs before or since in scale. What drove the Egyptians to pursue this mode of monument? The answer lies in their mythology and spiritual worldview, which invested the pyramids with profound meaning. To truly grasp where the pyramids came from, we must delve into the mind of ancient Egypt, into their religion, symbolism, and cosmic philosophy, because it was within those beliefs that the pyramids were conceived as necessary and effective. The pyramids were far more than grand mausoleums. For the ancient Egyptians, a pyramid was a sacred instrument, part celestial gateway, part resurrection machine, part statement of divine kingship. These stone leviathans are the physical embodiment of a people's longing for eternity and their intricate relationship between life, death, and the cosmos. At the heart of it was the concept of the pharaoh himself. In Egyptian belief, the pharaoh was not just a man, he was a living god-king, an incarnation of the divine. While alive, the king was associated with Horus, the falcon sky god who ruled the living. In death, the king became an Osiris, the god of the dead who was reborn. The pharaoh's well-being in the afterlife wasn't just a personal matter, it was a matter of national cosmic importance. A deceased king who successfully joined the gods would help maintain Ma'at, the divine order of the universe. The Nile would flood on time, the sun would rise each day, enemies would be held at bay. Thus, ensuring the king's resurrection was ensuring the continued stability of creation. Given this heavy burden, the Egyptians spared no effort to create a proper divine abode for the king's afterlife. The shape of the pyramid itself carried symbolic weight. One theory is that it represents the Ben-Ben, the primordial mound from the creation myth of Heliopolis. In that myth, before the world existed, there was only dark water and chaos, until a single mound of earth emerged, the Ben-Ben, upon which the creator god Atum, or Ra, stood to begin forming life. The pyramid, with its broad base and tapered top, is like an abstracted mound. Its capstone, often gilded, could be seen as the Ben-Ben stone itself, a gleaming point of first light. Notably, in Heliopolis there was a sacred stone, likely pyramid-shaped, that symbolized the sun's first appearance. Some scholars suggest the pyramids are that creation myth writ large in stone, each pyramid a recreation of the first mound, a place of regeneration. Another theory sees the pyramid shape as metaphorical sunbeams. In Egyptian art, the sun's rays are sometimes drawn as a cascade of lines ending in hands. The pyramid's four sloping faces could be perceived as solidified rays of the sun descending to earth. A text from a later pyramid of King Unas reads, "Behold, the king climbs on the light rays of the sun to the sky." And indeed, when you watch the sun over a pyramid, it does seem as if the light naturally slides down those angled sides. To reinforce this solar connection, pharaohs of the later 4th and 5th dynasties explicitly emphasized the sun cult. By the 5th dynasty, pharaohs called themselves Son of Ra, and they built separate sun temples with obelisks. But the pyramid remained a crucial link. It was likely considered a sort of sunrise machine for the soul. Each morning when the golden capstone caught the first sunlight, perhaps they believed it magically transfused that light down through the pyramid, energizing the king's spirit within. The orientation of the pyramids further underscores cosmic connections. The Great Pyramid's alignment to true north may tie to the imperishable stars, the circumpolar stars that never set. Egyptian texts yearn for the king to join those undying stars as they represented eternity. Meanwhile, the pyramid's east-west axis, causeway running east to the Nile, mirrored the journey of the sun from birth to death to rebirth. The entrance of many Old Kingdom pyramids is on the north side, facing North Star, but by the Middle Kingdom they shifted to the west, perhaps emphasizing the land of the dead. In either case, the idea was to connect the tomb to the greater cosmos, to plug the pharaoh's soul into the mechanisms of the heavens. Inside the pyramids, starting with Unas, the walls were inscribed with spells that literally function as a script for the pharaoh's soul to follow. They speak directly to the deceased. O king, raise yourself, take your throne among the stars, the gates of the sky are opened for you. The presence of those texts reveals how the Egyptians thought of the pyramid not as a mere storage for a body, but as a launch facility. The spells are full of imagery of climbing, flying, sailing. The king goes forth by day as a falcon, as a beam of light, as a new star. The pyramid's passages might have been aligned to certain stars to facilitate this. For instance, the Great Pyramid's narrow air shafts, small channels from the king's and queen's chambers angled to the exterior, are famously aligned. One from the king's chamber points to where Orion's belt would have been in the sky around 2500 BC, another to the circumpolar stars. From the queen's chamber, one pointed towards Sirius, associated with Isis, and another roughly to the northern stars. Were these star shafts purely symbolic, or did they serve as literal corridors for the king's K to travel out into the heavens? It's poetic to think an ancient engineer-astronomer might have said, "Let's give the king's soul a window to his target, Orion, the abode of Osiris." Orion, after all, represented Osiris, and there is a pyramid text utterance where the king says, "Behold, I am Orion, the Osiris of the sky." On a more down-to-earth spiritual level, the pyramids were parts of larger funerary landscapes that enacted the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The Valley Temple is where the king's body, after mummification, would undergo ceremonies like the opening of the mouth, reanimating his senses for use in the afterlife. The causeway symbolized the journey westward, perhaps even the voyage through the underworld. The mortuary temple adjoining the pyramid was the stage for daily offerings by priests to nourish the king's spirit. The king's mummy lay sealed deep in the pyramid, in darkness, but the Ka, life force of the king, could venture out to the temple to partake in offerings. The Bi, soul, could fly out of the pyramid to roam the world or sky and return to the body as needed. The architecture facilitated this. False doors in the temple allowed the Ka to pass. Small conduits or those star shafts allowed the bar to depart. To the Egyptians, death was not an end, but a transformation. The pyramid was essentially a cocoon for this transformation, like the chrysalis for a butterfly. Within its depths, via mummification and ritual, the king would shed his mortal skin and emerge as an ark, a transfigured spirit, eternal and luminous. The step pyramid complex of Djoser includes a delightful touch, a dummy pair of doors on the pyramid's north side, and a statue of Djoser peering out through a hole. This was perhaps so Djoser's spirit could gaze upon the rising sun each day. The Great Pyramid's design likewise ensured that the king could symbolically see or access critical cosmic events. There's also an element of political symbolism. Pyramids were propaganda in stone. They loudly proclaimed the pharaoh's divine power and the centralized might of his state. They were visible far and wide. On a clear day, the Great Pyramid would gleam like a white mountain, possibly visible from the high ground dozens of miles away. Imagine the psychological impact on someone from a foreign land or a distant province arriving by boat and seeing these geometric monoliths on the horizon. It would be clear that Egypt was a land of incredible order and resources, led by a being of extraordinary capability. Even today they inspire awe, how much more so in ancient times when they were pristine. Herodotus tells a story that as generations passed, the Egyptians came to resent the pyramid-building pharaohs for their cruelty. Whether that's true or not, it's likely that building pyramids was hard on the populace and treasury. Yet it seems the Egyptians continued doing it willingly for quite some time, which indicates that it wasn't just coerced labour, there was belief involved. workers left graffiti like "How splendid is the Pyramid of Khufu," perhaps genuine pride. The pyramid was a national project that tied everyone, from high priests to village corvée workers, into a shared religious national enterprise. We should mention how pyramids interacted with the concept of the afterlife in broader Egyptian religion. For common Egyptians, they couldn't have pyramids. They were buried in simpler graves, but many aspects of royal ideology filtered down. By the New Kingdom, even non-royals placed pyramidions atop their tomb chapels and inscribed coffin texts or Book of the Dead spells to ensure their safe passage. The pyramid form itself became a motif of protection and aspiration. Even today, small pyramid-shaped tombs exist in some cemeteries, an unconscious echo of this very old idea that a pyramid is a conduit to eternity. The spiritual significance of pyramids, in short, is vast. They were the intersection of earth, the tomb base, and sky, the pointed tip, of human effort and divine aspiration, of death and rebirth. They allowed the pharaoh to become an eternal star and an everlasting king in the afterlife, joining the pantheon to watch over Egypt. And by doing so, it was believed he ensured the sun would continue to rise and the Nile flood, cosmic stability. So, the pyramids were also monuments to life, life unending, life in harmony with cosmic cycles. It's worth noting the ancient Egyptians themselves left some clues to how they perceived pyramids. The name of Khufu's pyramid was Akhet Khufu, meaning horizon of Khufu. What a poetic concept. The horizon is where the sky meets the earth, where the sun rises and sets, essentially a gateway between worlds. To call the pyramid the king's horizon is to say it's the place he will appear eternally, like the sun on the horizon each morning. Similarly, Khafre's pyramid was called Great is Khafre, Menkaur's Divine is Menkaur, each name encapsulating the power and sanctity of the structure as reflecting the king's status. Unus's pyramid was modest, but its internal texts proclaim, "This is Unus, who has become the great star in the sky." The pyramids quite literally fulfilled the Egyptian belief in making the king a star, an object in the sky, fixed and shining. As with all things, though, pyramids had a dual nature. On the one hand, they were deeply spiritual, but on the other, they were worldly displays of wealth and power. That mix has always made people wonder, even in antiquity, if there wasn't some secret or mystery behind them. This curiosity and mystique have given rise to many alternative theories over the years about where the pyramids came from and how they were built. Theories involving lost civilizations, advanced ancient technology, or even extraterrestrial help. It's a testament to the pyramid's otherworldly aura that some people even doubt humans could have built them unaided. We should explore these alternative or fringe theories, not to lend them undue credence, but to understand the full spectrum of pyramid fascination. In doing so, we can appreciate what's fact and what is fanciful, and why the truth of the pyramids is, in many ways, just as marvelous as the speculation. The grandeur and mystery of the pyramids have always invited speculation beyond the scholarly and the mundane. From ancient legends of giants and sorcerers to modern TV shows about aliens and Atlantis, alternative theories abound about who built the pyramids and for what purpose. It's only fair in this sweeping exploration to acknowledge these ideas, to open that chamber of secrets and see what glitters and what is mere dust. As we do, we'll keep an open mind but also a critical eye, weighing these notions against evidence. One enduring proposition is that the pyramids were the product of a lost civilization, one far older or more advanced than the Egyptians of the 4th dynasty. The tale of Atlantis, first told by Plato as a philosophical fable, has been grafted onto Giza in many modern imaginings. Could it be some wonder that survivors of a sunken advanced culture came to Egypt and taught the locals how to build pyramids, or even built them before recorded history? Proponents of such ideas often point to supposed anomalies. The precision of the pyramids is too high, they claim, to fit the abilities of simple Bronze Age farmers, or they cite the Great Sphinx's heavily eroded body as evidence it dates back to a rainier epoch, thousands of years earlier than Khafra, suggesting a civilization predating dynastic Egypt made it, and perhaps the pyramids. It's true that the Sphinx shows significant erosion, and some geologists like Robert Schoch argued it could be from heavy rainfall circa 7000 to 5000 BC. That drew speculation that an unknown culture carved it and maybe built proto-pyramids. However, most Egyptologists and many geologists contend the erosion is explainable by wind, sand, and periodic flooding, plus the fact that the Sphinx's head, protected by harder rock and possibly recarved in pharaonic times, is much less eroded than the body. Additionally, everything around the Sphinx, the adjacent Sphinx Temple, the pyramids and their surrounding tombs, fits neatly in Old Kingdom context. There is a continuous archaeological record from the primitive graves of prehistory through the gradual steps to pyramid building. If an Atlantean superculture had erected pyramids around 10,000 BC, we'd expect to find tools or inscriptions or debris from that era around the sites. We do not. Instead, we find workers' villages from circa 2500 BC and graffiti by Khufu's work gangs, even an accounting papyrus from his reign. The evidence solidly credits the Egyptians we know with building the pyramids. So why do lost civilization theories persist? Perhaps because the pyramids seem so beyond ordinary experience that some feel they must have involved extraordinary knowledge. Also, there's a certain romantic appeal, the notion of a forgotten chapter of human history that might have possessed secrets of construction or technology now lost. It's the stuff of fantasy novels and movies, and undeniably intriguing. But the real story of Egyptians developing skills step by step is backed by mountains or pyramids of evidence. We see the evolution from mastaba tombs to step pyramids to true pyramids. We see experiments that failed and lessons learned, like at Meidum and the Bent Pyramid. This incremental progress is inconsistent with the idea of a fully formed, advanced blueprint handed down from a lost age. In reality, the pyramids appear to be the genius of the Egyptians themselves, which, if one thinks about it, is even more inspiring than the idea that someone else did it for them. Another wildly popular notion is that the pyramids were built with help from, or under the direction of, extraterrestrials. The so-called ancient astronaut theory got mainstream attention in the late 20th century through books like Chariots of the Gods by Erich von Däniken. Under this theory, alien visitors, perhaps seen as gods by ancient people, provided the advanced know-how or even physical labour to create monumental structures worldwide, pyramids in Egypt, Stonehenge, the Nazca Lines, etc. They argue things such as the stones are too heavy for humans to move, the alignment is too precise to be done without modern instruments, or that certain depictions in hieroglyphs, which are often misinterpreted, like the so-called light bulb in Dendera, which is actually a lotus flower with a snake, symbolic of creation, show high technology. Engaging as the idea is, and it has fueled countless science fiction tales, there's no actual evidence of alien involvement. We find no microchips in the desert, no laser-cut megaliths, only chisels, sledges, and human skeletons with arthritis from hard labour. The achievements of the pyramid builders can be explained with the tools and techniques we know they had, as we've done in detail, Why attribute it to aliens? Often because of an underestimation of ancient people's capabilities or an overestimation of the difficulty of moving big rocks. We must remember, humans built Gothic cathedrals without electricity or engines, structures of immense complexity and beauty. Humans colonized nearly every environment on Earth using Stone Age tools. Building a pyramid with enough organization is within human capacity. It's actually a bit sad to think we would credit little green men before crediting our own ancestors with ingenuity. Interestingly, no ancient Egyptian text ever says beings came from the sky to build for us. Instead, they proudly inscribed their kings' names on the monuments and their own. The workers even left those graffiti with Khufu's name inside hidden chambers, presumably never meant to be seen by the public, which argues strongly against any kind of later forgery. It's genuine evidence that ordinary Egyptians built this under Khufu's reign. Alternative theories also venture into the realm of high technology existing in ancient Egypt, not extraterrestrial, but perhaps Egyptians harnessing powers we didn't realize. Some fringe theorists propose that the Egyptians had a form of electrical knowledge, pointing to the Baghdad battery, a small jar with an iron rod found in Iraq that might have been used for electroplating, though there's no clear link to Egypt's pyramids. Others imagine that they knew secrets of acoustics or sonic levitation, claims that priests could use sound or chant to lift stones. No evidence of that beyond mythic storytelling. There's the enduring myth of pyramid power, the idea that the pyramid shape itself can preserve food or sharpen razors. Experiments have largely debunked these claims. Any effects observed were either minor or not reproducible under controlled conditions. Another line of alternative thought deals with mathematical or geographical codes hidden in the pyramids. People have noted that the Great Pyramid sits very nearly at the intersection of Earth's longest lines of latitude and longitude that cover land. Essentially, it's near the centroid of Earth's landmass distribution. Others point out its alignment and dimensions in code values like pi or the mean distance to the Sun or the circumference of the Earth, depending on what units you use. Could that be intentional? Those who support these ideas think the pyramid builders had advanced knowledge of the globe and math, perhaps given by an earlier civilization or aliens. The consensus view is that most of these correlations are coincidental or a result of selective interpretation. For instance, the Great Pyramid's latitude is about 29.9792 degrees north, and interestingly, the speed of light is 299,792 kilometers per second, a curious numerical match, but utterly coincidental since the ancients didn't use decimal degrees or kilometers. And what are the odds? Well, with enough numbers to play with, you can find some that match something meaningful to us. It's like finding patterns in clouds. The Egyptians likely didn't intend to encode the speed of light, claiming that would mean they had precision timekeeping and distance measurement to derive it, which they did not. However, it's worth mentioning that the Egyptians were quite mathematical in a practical sense. The Rhind Mathematical Papyrus, a Middle Kingdom document, shows they could calculate areas, volumes, and use fractions deftly. They probably did have an approximation of pi, perhaps 22/7, for certain calculations like circular granaries. So if the pyramid's proportions have elegant ratios, it could be by design or by happenstance of choosing convenient integers for rise, shrun, the seked. But what they did not leave behind was any text like, by the way, we aligned the pyramid with the North Pole because X, and we made its shape encode pi because Y. Without that, these ideas remain speculative overlays by modern minds. The allure of thinking there's a secret code or hidden message in the pyramids is strong. It suggests a Da Vinci Code-style mystery to be unravelled. In the 19th century, a whole field called pyramidology arose, where enthusiasts measured the interior passages of the Great Pyramid and claimed they predicted biblical events or world history in the lengths of corridors, like inches corresponding to years. They got quite carried away. None of that turned out credible under scrutiny. It was more a projection of those people's desires for prophecy and mystique. So, stepping back, why do alternative theories persist despite evidence? Partly because the pyramids provoke awe, and with awe sometimes comes disbelief. It's that feeling of, I can't imagine humans doing this, so maybe something else did. It's also because the pyramids still have unknowns, like what's in that newly detected void, or exactly how the labour was organised. And in the absence of full knowledge, speculation grows to fill the gap. There's also an element of the allure of the mysterious. Some people simply prefer an exciting unknown or conspiracy to a well-documented explanation. Additionally, for over a millennium after the Pyramid Age, even Egyptians themselves lost certain knowledge, like how to read hieroglyphs or who exactly some pyramids belonged to. By the New Kingdom, some attribution was confused. So, alternative explanations and myth-making began early. Interestingly, some alternative notions have spurred real investigations that produced real discoveries. The theory of hidden chambers led to the Scan Pyramids project, scanning Khufu's pyramid with muon detectors, and they indeed found a big void that we didn't know about. Now, that void is likely a leftover gap in construction or a relieving space, not an alien control room, but it shows that continuing to probe the pyramids can yield surprises. And sometimes the line between fringe and scientific inquiry can blur. A quest to find mysteries might still motivate new technology that finds something prosaic but interesting. In sum, after looking at all these fringe theories, what emerges is that the known, factual story of the pyramids is still the most compelling. That a society in the Stone Bronze Age could marshal such knowledge and organisation to build these colossal geometric marvels says something incredibly inspiring about human capability. We don't need aliens or Atlanteans when we have Khufu and Imhotep and thousands of unnamed Egyptians who together achieved what was arguably the world's first great feat of engineering. The real story has drama aplenty, visionary leaders, trial and error, breakthroughs in design, the sweat of tens of thousands, and an unwavering spiritual drive. And yet, it's not hard to understand why alternative ideas arise. The pyramids are just that extraordinary. They make us dream and speculate. They challenge our hubris. Were we really more advanced than ancients, or just standing on their shoulders? They spark the imagination, leading some to UFOs and others to mystical energies. In a way, these fringe theories are a tribute. They're modern folklore blossoming around an ancient wonder, much as the ancients themselves wove myth around these structures. Having explored those outer fringes, let's return to solid ground and see how modern science and archaeology are continuing to unravel the pyramids' remaining mysteries in a more systematic way. Paradoxically, today's high-tech tools can seem almost magical. We can scan through stone and peer into voids never seen by human eyes. What are these new discoveries, and how are they rewriting our understanding? And after all that, what do the pyramids ultimately mean to us, here and now? As we near the end of our journey, the sands of Giza have a few more secrets to yield, and the pyramids have a few more lessons to impart about human aspiration and legacy. Here in the 21st century, the pyramids of Egypt remain dynamic subjects of exploration. They may be ancient, but they are not static. We are still uncovering new information about them. sometimes quite literally peeking into hidden places that have been sealed for millennia. Modern science has effectively armed us with wizard eyes to see through stone and magic carpets, drones and satellites to survey the desert from above. The result? A string of exciting discoveries that prove there is still much to learn. Take satellite imagery. Using high-resolution satellites and even infrared sensing, archaeologists like Dr. Sarah Parkek have identified subsurface anomalies consistent with buried structures. In 2011, Parkek announced that her team's satellite survey had potentially spotted the remains of 17 undiscovered pyramids, along with thousands of ancient tombs and settlements, by detecting subtle differences in vegetation and soil that indicate walls or foundations underground. Now, not all of these have been ground-truthed. A couple of supposed pyramid sites turned out to be something else upon excavation, but the approach has revolutionized how we locate sites. In a country like Egypt, with its shifting sands and growing towns, being able to map archaeological features from space is invaluable. It's possible that some smaller pyramids, maybe provincial step pyramids or satellite pyramids, still lie hidden, found first not by a desert trekker, but by a computer analysing pixel data from orbit. Then there's LiDAR, light detection and ranging, a technique where lasers mounted on drones or planes send pulses to the ground to create ultra-detailed topographic maps. LiDAR has famously found lost cities in jungles like the Maya region, but in Egypt it can help detect minute height variations in flat desert that might signal collapsed structures. It has been used around Saqqara and Dahshur to map out the terrain and old walls buried under sand. For example, at Dahshur, LiDAR and magnetometry surveys helped reveal the layout of pyramid complexes and their temples that are now ruinous mounds. By peeling back the desert veneer digitally, we can recreate layouts of entire funerary landscapes. One of the most jaw-dropping modern initiatives is the Scan Pyramids project, which employs cosmic ray muon radiography to scan the insides of pyramids non-invasively. In 2017, this team of scientists from France, Japan and Egypt announced they had detected a previously unknown void deep within Khufu's Great Pyramid, a space roughly 30 meters long above the Grand Gallery, in an area not accessible by any known passage. This was like finding a hidden room in the attic of a house you've lived in all your life, without even entering. We literally used particle physics to X-ray one of the wonders of the world. The void's purpose is still uncertain. It could be a leftover construction cavity. Some hypothesize the Grand Gallery, and this void together allowed an internal ramp or just lightened the structure. Or it might be an undiscovered chamber, though getting to it physically without damaging the pyramid is a challenge. Any traditional excavation is out of the question. The mere existence of such a sizable, unknown space in the Great Pyramid was a humbling reminder that these monuments can still keep secrets despite being studied for centuries. And it didn't stop there. In 2023, Scan Pyramids made headlines again. Using an endoscopic camera threaded through a tiny drilled hole, they revealed the first images of a hidden corridor just behind the north face of the Great Pyramid above the original entrance. This corridor is about 9 meters long, with a triangular cross-section formed by chevron blocks. It likely was a structural feature, perhaps meant to reduce weight over the entrance, or perhaps part of design to access something, but it's new to us. Seeing it, perfectly preserved with its ceiling stones leaning together, felt almost like peering back in time to the moments of construction. No one had walked that little passageway since the pyramid was sealed. These kinds of non-invasive explorations blend high-tech with the thrill of classic archaeology. Meanwhile, conventional archaeology with trowel and brush continues to yield finds around the pyramids. In the last couple of decades, excavations of the workers' cemetery at Giza by Egyptologist Zahi Hawass unearthed the tombs of some of the overseers and craftsmen, containing skeletal remains that show arthritis and healed fractures, consistent with heavy labour, but also evidence of good medical care. Some injuries were set properly. This lends further weight to the picture of a cared-for workforce, not slaves worked to death without aid. A few tomb inscriptions from Giza mention titles like Director of Draftsmen for the Pyramid or Overseer of Limestone Quarrying, which give us specific roles and human faces behind the construction effort. At other pyramid sites, archaeologists have stumbled upon new mini-pyramids. In 2005, a previously unknown small pyramid, possibly for a queen, was found near the larger pyramid of Teti at Saqqara. In 2017, remains of what is believed to be a 13th dynasty, 1800s BC, small pyramid surfaced at Dashur. It had mostly collapsed, but the substructure and some inscribed blocks identified it as a king's daughter's pyramid. These remind us that not all pyramids are giant. Many rulers and royals built smaller ones that time has reduced to rubble. Modern science has also tackled materials. Analysis of the mortar used in the Great Pyramid shows it's made of gypsum, a common ancient mortar, but interestingly, it's stronger than the stones it binds, perhaps contributing to the pyramid's durability. There were theories that some pyramid blocks, especially at the top, might have been cast as a kind of early concrete from liquefied limestone. A few materials scientists suggested it in the 2000s, seeing unusual microbubbles in some stones. This geopolymer theory remains contentious. Most geologists and Egyptologists see clear evidence of carved natural stone in all cases, and the casting idea isn't widely accepted. Still, it shows the creative ways researchers test hypotheses, from scanning electron microscopes on rock samples to chemical content analysis. One cannot overstate the significance of the Meera diary discovered in 2013 at Wadi al-Jarf on the Red Sea coast. It's a cache of papyri, the logbooks of an official named Meera, who oversaw boat crews shipping limestone to Giza in Khufu's last years. Published in 2016, this find was essentially like unearthing a scribbled shipping manifesto that confirms in plain words what we logically assumed. Docked at Tura, loaded 40 jars of stone for the pyramid, delivered to Akhet Khufu, crew is tired but in good spirits. Paraphrased. It mentions Ankaf, a known prince and project manager. This is direct contemporary evidence of the supply chain for Khufu's pyramid, an extraordinary historical document to complement the physical evidence. It's as if a foreman's diary from the Empire State Building construction had surfaced, detailing mundane yet crucial tasks, bringing life to what can otherwise be an impersonal feat. All these high-tech and low-tech discoveries combine to refine our understanding. We no longer have to rely on the wild guesses of ancient historians or the overactive imagination of Victorian theorists. We can check, measure, and sometimes literally look inside. Does that demystify the pyramids? Perhaps a bit. As we see more pieces of the puzzle, the picture gets clearer. But, intriguingly, some mystery always remains, because each answer often begets new questions. What exactly is that big void? Why did they leave a corridor and not fill it? Was something intended to be accessed later? Are there any objects or inscriptions hidden that could be recovered without harm? Time and careful science will tell. One thing modern research continuously underscores is the humanity of the pyramid builders. We find their footprints and fingerprints in paths worn into ramps, in hieratic notes on blocks, this side up, in the gentle way a skeleton's bones knit after an injury, implying someone took care of that injured worker. It's profoundly moving, These huge pyramids might suggest an image of brute mass and tyranny, but the details reveal community and intention. For instance, near Menkaur's pyramid, excavators found a tiny votive offering buried, perhaps left by a worker asking the gods for protection or giving thanks for the project's safety. In a sense, the pyramids are still doing what they were meant to do, inspiring wonder and prompting people to think beyond themselves. For the ancient Egyptians, that meant imagining eternity and aligning with the cosmos. For us, it means contemplating the depths of history and the heights of human achievement. The pyramids have made individuals throughout time reflect on big themes: time, mortality, ambition, legacy. And so we arrive at a final contemplation. After all the data and dates, ramp theories and star alignments, one still stands in awe of these pyramids. Visiting them, or even just envisioning them, one cannot escape a flood of existential thoughts. They make you consider your own fleeting life in contrast to these monuments that have endured for over 45 centuries. They make you wonder about the people who built them. Did they sense they were creating something timeless? They cause us to ask, what of ourselves will last that long? And does it even matter if nothing does? There is a kind of poetry to the pyramids that goes beyond their stones and measurements. Percy Shelley captured a slice of it in his sonnet Ozymandias, where a traveller encounters the ruins of a once great king's statue in the desert with the inscription, "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair," pointing out the ultimate futility of arrogance against time. The irony is that for that fictional Ozymandias, nothing remained but broken pieces. Yet here at Giza, Khufu's works still stand, enormous and unmistakable. One could almost imagine Khufu answering Shelley, "Not all fell to dust, but in truth even Khufu's glory is gone, his body likely long decayed or stolen, his treasures plundered. What remains is the idea of Khufu embodied by the pyramid." The ancient Egyptians believed that to speak a person's name was to make them live again. By that measure, every time we say Khufu or Khafra or Giza, we are participating in their immortality. The pyramids, then, succeeded in ways their builders perhaps didn't anticipate. They wanted the pyramids to guarantee their king's afterlife and the nation's prosperity. The afterlife part, who can say? But they certainly guaranteed remembrance. These gigantic tombs turned their occupants into legends. They also became a mirror in which each era and individual sees something different. To some, they are symbols of human folly, piling up rocks, thinking one can cheat death. To others, they symbolize human genius, organizing labor and knowledge to achieve the unprecedented. They can represent spiritual yearning, reaching for the heavens, or oppressive power, the abilities of a god-king. In truth, they encapsulate all of that, the complexity of civilization. Philosophically, the pyramids force us to confront the concept of time, stand before one and realize it was ancient to Julius Caesar, it was ancient to Socrates. It was already over 1,000 years old when Moses, if he lived, is said to have been in Egypt. And here it is today, in our era of microchips and space travel, still essentially the same pile of masonry painstakingly laid in the Bronze Age. Against that backdrop, how small our individual lives seem, and yet, conversely, how potent human efforts can be to echo across the ages. It's a paradox. The pyramids make you feel insignificant and profoundly connected to humanity at once. There is an emotional resonance too. Many visitors describe feeling a sense of peace or connection at the pyramids. Perhaps it's the geometry, the pyramid shape has a certain harmony. Perhaps it's the silent witness of their longevity, the desert setting, the play of light and shadow on those broad faces, the wind keening around those immovable corners. It's like nature and human art meeting in quiet conversation. Even with throngs of tourists, one can find a still corner at Giza at sunrise or sunset, sit on a weathered block and lean against warm stone, and just feel history wash over. You might fancy hearing faint echoes of chisels, or a priest's chant carried on the breeze, the impressions of memory held in the place. We began this journey with the silent night and those silhouettes in the starlight. Let's return there now, wiser about facts, but still susceptible to wonder. The sun has set over Giza. The horizon glows orange, then fades to purple. One by one, stars blink into being, the same stars that ancient Egyptians watched as they formulated the alignments of these monuments. Orion rises, as it did on nights when Khufu's workers trudged back to camp, tired but proud after raising another few layers of stone. The desert grows cool. In the distance, perhaps a jackal yips. In ancient times, a sacred sound, the call of Anubis, god of the necropolis. The pyramids stand, dark and triangular voids, against the deep blue of night. What do they say to us, those pyramids, in this hushed moment? They don't speak in words, yet they speak volumes. They tell us that vision can become reality, that an idea combined with effort can literally reshape landscapes. They remind us that life is transient, but culture endures. Khufu is long gone, but what he and his people built still touches us. They challenge us to think about what eternity means, not necessarily a literal afterlife of the pharaoh sailing with Ra, but eternity as the ripple one leaves in the pond of time. And maybe too they caution us, even the mightiest works are not immune to the slow, patient forces of nature. One day even these pyramids may erode to nubs. Eternity perhaps belongs only to the stars and the concept of eternity itself. Yet standing there, it's hard not to feel that the pyramids have achieved a slice of immortality. Through them the voices of the ancient builders still whisper. As a modern man or woman runs a hand along a limestone block and feels the slight tool marks, they are touching the fingers of that labourer from 4,500 years ago who carved it. In that sense, the pyramid is a message from one epoch to another saying, we were here, we strove, we believed, we created. Our exploration is ending, but the pyramids remain, as they likely will for ages hence. When we depart Giza, whether physically or in our imagination, we do so enriched by its story. The vast silence of the desert returns. The stars wheel overhead, and the great triangles of stone keep their vigil. The pyramids have seen thousands of sunsets and will see thousands more, and if we listen, really listen, in the quiet of our minds, perhaps we can hear the faint echo of that eternal message carried on the night breeze, an invitation to remember and to marvel, as countless before us have done, and countless after us will do. In the end, where did the pyramids come from? They came from the human heart and mind, from our urge to find meaning, to strive for greatness, to link earth with sky. They are the product of a unique time and place, yet they belong to all of us as a heritage of human possibility. As we leave the Giza Plateau in our story, let's carry a bit of its timeless awe with us. Under the same stars that watched ancient Egypt, we too dream of touching the heavens, and the pyramids stand as enduring proof that with enough vision and will, we can turn our dreams to stone, and those stones may far outlast our mortal days, speaking for us when we ourselves can no longer speak. The desert night deepens, the pyramids are quiet, their heavy stones at rest, but their spirit, the collective ambition and wonder of humanity, shines on, imperishable, in the cool, clear starlight above.